good morning, and thank you so much, ladies and gents, colleagues, for coming through and making time to join with us. My name is John Mufugeng. I am the coordinator of this training program. I work at the Social Housing Regulatory Authority, the SHRA. Some of you or many of you may have interacted with us through various processes that we administer. So welcome. In fact, I am glad and delighted that finally we can deliver on this topic, because it's been 2 years, and some of you, I'm sure, will attest to that fact that 2 years ago, or back in 2023 already, you had enlisted for this subject, for this topic, and due to some of the delays that we had, we weren't able to deliver on that last year. So quite excited that finally we can have a session on this particular subject. Really, we are here for the next 2 days, as you would be aware. So the focus really for the next 2 days is really just to zoom into one of the critical and important processes of the SHRA, to which I think many of you, as you are here this morning, may have interest. And this pertains to how do you establish and set up yourself as a social housing institution, and how do you further get that entity or that institution to be accredited and licensed, in simple terms, to be one of the delivery partner. Because in the manner that we deliver social housing and the projects, and we manage those projects, us as a regulator, we work in partnership with private and public sector stakeholders. So this particular process really is to just zero into this process that pertains to one who says, I want to partner with the SHRA as a social housing institution. How do I set up? Please assist me. How do I get myself accredited? Please assist me. So for the next 2 days, that will be what we attempt to do, to really unpack this process. If there's been any criticism or feedback rather that we have received as the SHRA, has been that a lot of our processes are not only unknown, but even for those that are and have attempted to engage those processes, they found this process to be quite cumbersome. So this is why, as part of the response to that feedback, we thought, let's start with a training program wherein we could assist, in particular this around this topic. So yeah, that's essentially why we are here for the next 2 days. If anyone of you was not clear, I'm not alone. I'm joined by 2 of my colleagues, Hafib and Jadelam, who will be leading the delivery and the facilitation of this subject, and Mpho will also be assisting the background with regard to any administrative support. We will be taking what you call comfort breaks as we go along. I think our plan is to run the session up till 12:30, 1 o'clock the latest. So in the interim, we will also just allow those comfort breaks in the program. One last thing, you'll notice that I have muted and disabled your cameras. This is just to secure the quality of this call, because at the end of these next 2 days, what we want to do is to send you a set of handouts. You will see that you have not just yet received any form of handout, whether it be a guide or supporting documents or anything like that. So we are going to be putting together a pack that includes the recordings of this next 2 days. and that would form part of what you receive at the end of today. So I think probably we'll aim for sometime next week, given that we are almost on the end tail of the weekend. With regard to the recordings, it sometimes does take a bit longer to edit this before they can, be sent out. So yeah, great time and quite an exciting time for us to deliver on this topic. Without much ado, I will allow then and hand over the session to Hafi, who will lead the delivery. If there is anything pressing, given that your mics are disabled, please put it on the chat line. Between myself and Mpo, we will be monitoring the chat room or the chat line, and we'll bring those up. But as well, you have the function to still raise up your hand if there is anything pressing that you want to stop Hafi on, and we'll just allow you to deposit whatever it is that you want to deposit at the junction. So I see there's already a hand with that kin. Let me just perhaps allow your mic. If you just unmute yourself and deposit your comment or question before we hand over the session to Hafi. Just unmute yourself. Amogelang. Right, I guess Amogelang is battling with whatever it is that she's battling or he's battling with. Hafi, if you are ready, the presentation is still on flight mode, right, on your side?
Mm-hmm. Still flying.
Hafi?
Okay, I'm here. Paul, are you going to commence the session and then I'll kick in once you're done with the introductions?
Okay, no, that's fine, Khafi. And then I'm aware that on the Google Forms, we do not have every participant there, but hoping that as time goes, people will keep on popping in. But just a summary, we are joined by senior portfolio managers, directors, housing managers, consultants, CEOs, and project managers, and one non-executive director. And the expectations are around understanding the social housing and market entry and getting knowledge and learning, and also the information on the accreditation process. They also want to understand what is the SHRA and how to register, and also to do some networking. So I think, on a nutshell, we have a lot that wants to understand the accreditation process and how to register, and also to understand the social housing market. So I think those are the biggest key points that everyone would like to gain some insight on. Thank you, Khafi.
Thanks, Paul, and morning, everyone, again. I'm Khafi Vengadachilum. I'll be leading the facilitation of the training program. You're welcome to use the chat if you have pressing questions as we proceed. What we aim to do is, because we've got a lot of content to cover, we are wanting you to either use the chat, or we're going to be building in a half an hour reflection or evaluation of what was done at each break in the morning tea, and then as we close, you can either bank your discussion points then, or you can put your comments in the chat, and we will aim to address it when we do the reflection. So at any given time, please jot your thoughts down on paper, ask the questions. There's no stupid questions. We're all learning as we go along, and we all are going to help each other to proceed into this business of social housing. Can you move the slide, John? Perhaps 2 slides up. So today's program, up until tea time, is we're going to briefly cover the SHRA accreditation system, That was one of the key points that you guys had as a expectation. But we do have Zanele, the accreditation officer, coming in tomorrow at 12, and she will then also give you hands-on information on the process and how to do it. But I'm going to flash over it this morning. We're then going to talk about how to establish your social housing institution. Remember, if you want to be accredited, you've got to establish your institution. So first things first, let's talk about that. As we go along, we are going through the criteria sets that is required to become accredited. But I also want to add that these are the very things that you have to do if you are starting up an SHI or an ODA. It isn't as if the SHA accreditation needs are different from what you should be doing to establish an organization. They are exactly the same. It is something that you should be doing, and we are going to just advocate for best practice in this regard. We have many years of experience. We've learned many lessons. We've made many mistakes. There is no reason why you should be making any mistakes at this stage, because we have the experience and we have the models that are working. So we'll then be doing a case study at 9:50 before we start the good governance section. Good governance is the biggest area that you need to focus on when you're establishing an SHI and as an ongoing SHI, but it is also the area of biggest failure. So where social housing institutions fail, it's in the main around governance. So we're going to have extensive presentation around the aspects and elements of good governance. And then just before tea, we'll have a half an hour reflection or 15 minutes reflection. You can ask your questions, we can discuss things, and we can see how we address any questions that you may have. After tea, we're going to continue with good governance. There's quite a broad array of aspects that we need to cover. We're then going to move into financial viability and what that means for a social housing institution. And then we're going to have a short little video and reflection of the day. We aim to close by 1:45, 1 o'clock for the latest. Tomorrow morning, we'll go through our program for tomorrow. It continues across the other business areas. So we want to start with, can you move on, John, to the next slide? We'll take tomorrow's program tomorrow. So we're going to start on accreditation. And why accreditation? Remember, government is providing about 70% or up to 70% of the funding for social housing projects is by way of a capital grant. So it goes without saying that the SHA is there to ensure that those public funds that it is managing is protected, that they are investing in credible social housing institutions that have got the capacity to develop and manage. Look, it's the same like hospitals need to be accredited because people's lives are at stake. You get accreditation of hospitals, same thing. Government is disbursing huge amounts of money, and therefore it needs to know who it's doing its business with, and that these entities are in a position able to administer the funds that they disperse to them, but also just to see that the projects are delivered and they are managed and maintained for the intended target market. So that is why accreditation is required. Can we move on? What does the SHA look at when it accredits? It looks across 6 performance areas. It looks at your legal form. So how have you registered your company? Who are the directors? It looks at your not-for-profit status, regardless of whether you're a PTY Ltd or a not-for-profit or a co-op or a trust. There are not-for-profit principles that need to be required by a social housing institution. And those not-for-profit things are really related to not distributing assets and income and so on. So we'll take you through that detail. And then the third key performance area is good governance. It's really about the board of directors, the governance policies that you need to have in place, and all those types of things that will see that there is an oversight and there's strategic direction provided to the management of the organization. The next thing that we look at, and I'm missing one here, it's financial viability is actually number 4. And financial viability is really to ensure that your company is viable over the long term, and that your projects on a project by project basis is also viable over the long term. The next key performance area is effective tenant management. It's the core of our business. Our heartbeat of our business is client services management, as we call it. And the reason why it's at the core of what we do is because we're dealing with poorer, vulnerable tenants on low incomes who have much more social problems, and economically they're constrained. And so those types of things have a big emphasis on the work we do. We don't merely sign a lease agreement like the private sector does and leave the tenant as they please until they don't pay, and we then start sending them notices. No, we work with our tenants. We transform their lives. We intervene. We teach them how to become active citizens. We do many things to empower them and to build communities. The 6th element is efficient property management, and it's got to do with rent management, maintenance management, facilities management, vacancy management, and utilities management. We'll get into that detail tomorrow. And the last element, which is element number 7, is property development. So the SHRA wants to see that you have property development policies and plans in place, because the reason why you enter this business is not to become accredited and go to sleep. It is about becoming accredited, packaging your projects, delivering the projects, and managing the projects in that order. And so importantly, they want to see that. Now, across those 7 key performance areas, there's 3 things that the SHRA would look at. What is your staffing arrangements? What is your systems like? Have you got policies and procedures for all these 7 areas? And what is your performance management system looking like? How are you going to set your own KPIs? What are the thresholds you're setting? And how are you going to monitor that you're actually delivering on these 7 areas? Those are the 3 things that the SHRA would assess across all 7 areas. Can we move on? So the SHRA has 2 approaches to accreditation. There's a proactive approach and a more responsive approach. The proactive approach is it does a heat map across the country where there are restructuring zones, and it looks to see where there is insufficient social housing institution capacity. It then would go on an expression of interest or proposal call, calling for SHIs in those areas to ensure that delivery then happens in those restructuring zones. Now, a restructuring zone is a demarcated area that the municipality demarcates to say these are the areas in our municipality where we believe social housing is required. Normally, there are areas where there's economic development of a town is going in a certain nodal area. There's various corridors, growth corridors in municipalities, and it's along those growth corridors that you would need a low cost or low income rental accommodation. And so the municipalities then would demarcate these areas. We would check, or the SHRA would check to see whether there's sufficient social housing happening in there. If there's not enough institutions, it will call for the establishment of institutions. So that is the more proactive approach. Then the responsive approach is this approach where you guys have read about social housing, you're interested, you believe you can make a contribution towards the delivery and the management of social housing, and you therefore then approach the SHRA and say, I would like to become accredited. Now the SHRA does a number of things. Firstly, it has this type of training. It introduces you to social housing and for you to understand the entire concept of social housing. It then also provides education around how to become accredited. And then on the management side, once you are accredited, there's a number of training programs that it offers around how to do client services management, how to do rent management, how to be governed well. All those types of programs come in after you've been accredited to support you as you go on the journey to managing the stock, because this model, the social housing management model, is remarkably different to what the private sector does. Can we move on, John? So there's categories of accreditation. You can become fully accredited. Any new SHI without stock under management that is still developing its first project will never be fully accredited. So as you apply for accreditation, you need to aim for conditional accreditation for the sole reason that you will never be fully accredited until you're managing stock and you're meeting all the KPIs and thresholds on the management side of things. It is at that point that you become fully accredited. Then there's conditional accreditation in two categories. One where SHIs have a project in place and they conditionally accredited and they move on to apply for the grant and they move on to developing the project. Or an SHI that doesn't have a real project opportunity, but that is given a period of 3 years in which to find a project and commence delivery of that project. Then obviously there was a pre-accreditation stage. It's no longer relevant, but that is when the Act came into being way after SHIs were around. And so there was a period of 12 months in which those SHIs needed to be accredited. And then obviously there's the SHRI has the right to reject an application for the sole reason that the SHI does not meet the qualifying criteria. And even though it has been trained and received training, it still fails to meet the qualifying criteria. Can we move on, John? So this is just in picture form. I've explained it. It's just you guys can, when you get the presentation, you can have a read through it. But it then explains the various stages and what you need to do to meet each hurdle of the application process. Can we move on, John? I don't want to delve too much on this procedure because Zanele is going to speak to you about it, but I just want to introduce it. The process is you will email Zanele, you will ask for the application pack. She will first send you a fact sheet, which you would have to complete with your company information, very high level company information, and some information around the project that you're packaging. You then send that back to her, and what then happens is if they feel you do have a company that's registered with directors and you do have a project opportunity, she will then send you the application pack. Now, the application pack consists of those 7 folders of those areas that we in the previous slide. And so you would have to then begin to populate all the documents that are required. There's a verification sheet. That sheet tells you, explains to you exactly what it is that you need to complete. Submit. What happens is once you've submitted your application, you get a link from Zanele. You will then load your application and she would then receive that link and open your pack. And she would then verify that you have submitted all the documents that is required. If it is that in the verification process, you haven't submitted everything, she will give you another few days in which she will send you a query list and say, look, you haven't submitted 5 of the 10 documents that you needed to, and so you're given so many days to do it. Thereafter, it will go for external assessment, and you would then get the outcome. Now, this process is a 90-day process, right? So the SHRI is bound by the social housing regulations that indicate that the SHRI is 90 days to turn this over. So you should get an answer within 90 days. The way in which they assess and adjudicate is there's an assessment report from the external assessor. It goes to the EXCO for consideration and recommendation to their regulations committee. That committee then makes a recommendation to their council, which is like equivalent to the board of directors. And once that decision is made, they would then issue you with a certificate. That certificate enables you to go to the PD&F unit, the unit that approves the grant. The grant is called the CCG, the Consolidated Capital Grant, and it gives you then the right to go and apply for the funding for your project. That is a separate application process that also has a 90-day window. And I think John does run a training program on how to submit your application for the capital grant. Can we move on, John? So that's the process for accreditation. Obviously, then the social housing regulations require that the SHRA registered as a public register of all the accredited SHIs. So you can go onto the SHRA website, you can look at the public register, and you'll be able to see all the SHIs that have been accredited by the SHRA. Then the SHRA also has the right to withdraw accreditation. If you're not meeting the regulatory criteria, then it can be withdrawn. You can also then apply to have accreditation withdrawn because you no longer want to be an SHI, meaning that you would have to then give your funded stock back to the SHRA to allocate to another SHI. Can we move on, John? So I also want to explain the concept of an SHI versus an ODA, because those are the two types of entities that we can fund through the social housing program. So let's start with an SHI, because the training is really centered more about how to become an SHI. So SHIs are not-for-profit companies that would acquire land or buildings. They would develop that land and buildings. They would act as the owner of it, and they would manage it. And the reason why I separate ownership from management is because they're two very different things. To own a property means you need to insure it. You need to see that it's legally compliant. You need to see that the asset is preserved over the long term. Whereas the management of it is just collecting rent, doing the daily maintenance, ensuring that utilities are paid, and so on. So those are the four key pillars of an SHI. That's the work that they do. That is what the business is all about. Who goes and looks for land opportunities all the time? Who then develops that land? How do they manage the ownership, and how do they manage the properties and the tenancies itself? So if we had to look at a social housing institution, it is a not-for-profit business, but it's also not a loss-making business. We'll see that there's financial hurdles that need to be met to be able to be viable as a social housing institution. It's a marginal business, and I want to stress this. This is not something that's going to make anybody rich. It's that capital grant is actually used to reduce the rental significantly to what it's discounted to market by about 50% or more, you would find. So you're very limited in terms of your rental revenue once you receive the grant, because the rentals are prescribed and they are way below market rentals. So because your revenue is constrained and your expenses remain constant, if not increasing on a year-on-year basis, you would find that you're in a very constrained environment. You've got to be cost conscious to be able to run this type of business. And lastly, you are also a social entrepreneur. So yes, you must be entrepreneurial, because you must not be loss making. You must run it as a business, but you must run it on social principles, because we're working with poorer people earning between 1,850 and 5,500. If you had to very practically think, who are those people? Those people are casual employees, they are domestic workers, they are potentially gardeners, taxi drivers. They're vulnerable, their incomes are vulnerable. And so what do you do to be able to educate that part of the target market to improve their life and to improve their livelihood? So that social part becomes very important. You would find that if you did a longitudinal study on people that come into social housing, they may come in as a domestic worker and they may leave you 10 years later as an administrator in a clerical position or so. And that is what you want to see happening with the lives of the people that use social housing. And so, yes, entrepreneurial, important, but on a social basis. Can we move on, John? So social housing institutions, if we look at the actual Social Housing Act, it prescribes we're mandated to do these things. It must facilitate the development and undertake the management of the stock. In some instances, it can also manage the community residential unit program, which is another rental housing program of government. It must promote the creation of quality living environments. And the emphasis is on quality living environments from a sole point of view that we're not providing just a roof over the person's head. We're providing much more than that. You must reinvest operational services into further social housing projects. Now, that's an important one. That goes to say you can't distribute income, you can't distribute assets to any of the directors of the SHI. Every surplus that you make must be invested as equity into your next social housing project. And then you must apply for and achieve accreditation, and you must continuously comply with those accreditation requirements. Can we move on, John? You must have annual performance agreements with the local authority wherein which you have social housing projects. You must consult with residents through meaningful participation. Guys, please don't construe this to be setting up tenant committees. They do not work. They have not worked over the last 30 years in social housing. And so we have smarter ways of addressing meaningful participation between social housing landlords and their residents or their tenants. You must inform tenants on issues relating to consumer protection. And yeah, I just want to say, do not hide away from the tenants the fact that they can go to the rental tribunal and complain about you if they feel you are not treating them fairly or equitably, or you're not providing the services that you promised to provide in your lease agreement. Tell them upfront there's a rental tribunal so that it doesn't become, SHIs believe they must hide this information away from tenants, assuming that tenants are also not aware of the fact that they have other alternatives. They are not being satisfied by you as the landlord. You must observe and operate within best practice. And so that best practice is always shared with you through these order and platform that the SHA puts out all of the time. Again, I say to you, do not pay school fees. There's many lessons learned. You just speak to a few good practitioners and they will tell you, don't do it this way, do it that way, because this way works for you. And this is the outcome or the benefits of the best practice. And then obviously you must comply with ministerial norms and standards, especially as it relates to the actual development or the buildings that you're doing. The SHRA or the social housing has its own set of norms and technical norms and standards that you have to comply with in terms of the unit types, unit finishes, the robustness of the materials that you use. And much of that is available in the form of a manual as well. It gives you good guidance. Can we move on, John? So that is what an SHI is all about. So what is an ODA? An ODA, which is short for Other Delivery Agent, is a for-profit company that is interested to develop social housing. So initially when the Social Housing Act was being written, there was an acknowledgement that SHIs can grow at a certain rate, and that at the rate at which SHIs can grow, the demand would not be met. So it was said there's a private sector out there, they big developers, they're very good at putting up units. They may not be that good at managing social housing units, but they can certainly give us the numbers in terms of delivery. So the Act then made provision for this other category called Other Delivery Agent, which is generally a private sector property developer or property manager. So they work on a for-profit basis. And they come in and they would develop the stock. So the possible scenarios in which they do participate is they could be the owner of land, right? And they may develop the land themselves, or they may outsource the developer role and outsource the manager roles, because they're not interested in this low revenue, this marginal business. They would want to develop and provide their land at a cost to social housing and make their profits and leave the management role to a social housing institution. You could find that a property developer would come in. They would then develop on behalf of themselves. They would also own it, but they could potentially outsource the management of it, or they could do it in-house. And then you would find that there's private property managers that are interested to start managing social housing stock. We find increasingly that the sectional title market is subdued. And so many of those property management companies that expected to increase their management stock via sectional title management is now coming into social housing and looking at that as a way of increasing their portfolio that they have under management. So those are the private sector participants and the types of models that we've seen coming through from the private sector. The accreditation criteria is pretty much the same. So if there's any private sector ODAs or aspirant ODAs in the room, all the criteria we're going to go through is very much the same when you apply for ODA project accreditation, but except for the second KPA, which is not for profit. So that one doesn't apply to you, but everything else would apply to you. Thanks, John. Can we move on? Mpo, you are looking at the program. You must tell me when I must stop and when you're going to be coming in with your case study.
Yes, Khafi.
Yeah, you will tell me, eh?
Yes, I'll tell you. Don't worry.
Okay. So now we're moving on. That the previous few slides was really around establishing the business of social housing. Accreditation, and giving you a backdrop into what is an SHI, what is an ODA, and what accreditation means. We're moving on now. You're starting your business. You're on this journey. You understand the social housing program. You understand you've made a decision as to which way you're going. You want to either become an SHI or you want to become an ODA. So what we're going to cover now is the first two items, which is setting up your legal entity, how to what type of legal form you're going to take, how to set up your governance structure and the systems, how to do your strategic planning. Because remember, there must be a strategy, there must be a vision as to where you're going, how you're going, how you're going to get there. And then how to develop your operating system. So those are your operating policies and procedures that you're going to require, for financial management, tenant management, property management, and so on. How to develop your organization and gear it up, very important. You need people and resources to be able to do that. And then how to become accredited. So you've got to do all those other steps first to become accredited. Can we move on? So the first thing that the SHA would ask also is, what is your motivation? We've heard previously that social housing institutions are very altruistic in nature. They grow people, they develop people, they improve people's livelihoods, or they contribute towards those things. And so we can clearly say that an SHI is very, very much an altruistic type of entity. And we spoke at length about you being social entrepreneurial. So not being, like you get an NGO and a community-based organization, they are not entrepreneurial. They're just social institutions. They depend on grant funding to sustain the work they do. A social housing institution is not that. It's not an NGO. It's not a CBO. It is an NPC that is not for profit, but it is not loss making. I think I want to emphasize that element. Can we move on, John? So just to give you an overview of the business, your core business is client services management. We interchangeably use the term tenant management as well, and property management. So the core is your tenants and the properties that you're managing. Your core support business is financial management and internal management and potentially governance as well. Those two areas support the work of client services and property management. So we're going to be covering all of these policies that you need to develop to become accredited over the next day and tomorrow. Can we move on, John? So here's the big part of we're going into accreditation now. And the first KPI that you need to cover is legal form and not for profit. Can we move on, John? So from a legal form point of view, this is what the SHRA allows you to register, or the social housing regulations make provision for these types of entities. A company having a share capital, that is your PTY Ltd. Now, for me, this doesn't make sense because we're saying that an SHI needs to be a not-for-profit business. So even if you register a PTY Ltd, you've got in your MOI, you're going to have provisions to say there's no shareholding, there's no distribution of profits and income and so on. So for me, it doesn't make sense to have a PTY Ltd as a registered SHI. But potentially the reason why this is here is because it makes provision for ODAs to participate, because they would definitely be a PTY Ltd. I've highlighted a company limited by guarantee or not for profit because that is the embodiment of what an SHI is all about. That is the type of company that you should be registering if you want to be an SHI. You could be a housing cooperative. We don't have many of these in South Africa. There was a movement in the early 2000s to grow this part of this type of housing delivery agent. It has failed. We are only left with a few across the country who are struggling at this point in time. So we don't really find that. You could have a share block company, and we know for a fact that share block also went through many scandals over the years, and so we don't find any of those. You could be a communal property association or a voluntary association in terms of its constitution and being separate from its members, or you could be a trust. So those are the types of companies that you can register. Now, the next slide is we're going to talk about what must you consider when you choose your legal form. So it's important to consider the product offering. If it is that you want to develop more than social housing, you want to do a little bit of commercial property, you want to do some ownership units in between, you want to do a mix of uses and typologies, then you've got to think about what type of company is suitable for you. And then you've also got to look at the investment potential. So, will the banks be more amenable to lend to a NPC or to a PTY Ltd? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to raise finance out on the market. The grant goes up to about 70%. You're going to have a shortfall between 35 and 30%. And so you need to go to someone to fund that. How easy is it going to be for you to raise that funds? And then there's the issue of taxation. An NPC would be tax exempt, whereas a PTY Ltd won't be. And we've said that your revenue is marginal. And so if you can get tax exemption, you're making that savings, right? So these are the three considerations that you have to do. From a process point of view, you've got to register your company with the CIPC. You've got to register, develop an MOI, get it board approved, and send that to the CIPC for registration. And obviously with the CIPC registration, you've got to also then register the board of directors. You've got to indicate who are executive directors, and you've got to indicate who is non-executive directors. Can we move on, John? So the considerations for legal form, if you're going to do social housing only, then potentially the NPC is going to be your best route to go. If you're going to do commercial property, say for instance, you're going to do a social housing project and on the ground floor, you're going to do some shops. Remember, as long as there is less than 25% of your revenue coming from sources other than social housing stock, you can still register to be a not-for-profit company, and you can still register for tax exemption as long as the revenue from commercial property doesn't exceed 25% of your total revenue. So from a product offering point of view, you have to make that decision, and that's going to help you decide what your legal form is. And then from a raising of finance point of view, an NPC has no shares. It can attract donations and government grants. So over and above the capital grant that the SHRA is going to give you, you could potentially say, I'm an NPC, I'm tax exempt, go to social development department and say, help me with my community development programs, because they give grants for various aspects in terms of social justice programs and so on. So as an NPC, you'll have that added ability to be able to attract other donations for the work that you're going to, the developmental work that you're going to be doing with your tenants. From a PTY Ltd point of view, it will be easier to raise equity on the market, right, from other investors, and also easier possibly to raise debt funding as well. Because NPCs are also viewed by the commercial banks as being a loss-making institution and so on. And you really got to show that your balance sheet is strong to be able to convince the private sector bankers to come in. And then obviously cooperatives are seen as a very high risk because of the high failure rate in South Africa in particular. Can we move on, John? From a taxation point of view, if you're not for profit, you can register to become a public benefit organization, and that then qualifies you for tax exemption. I mean, I don't know what the company tax rate is. Is it 29% or something in that area? You can save that and pass that savings on to tenants and give more benefits to tenants. So it's important if you become an NPC to apply for tax exemption because you make that savings. From a value added tax point of view, so because your rental revenue is not taxable, right? Means you don't have to register for VAT because your income is not VATable, and so you can't claim back on expenses for VAT. But the problem for social housing institutions, the first thing you do is you develop a property and you pay VAT on all the aspects of the development. Now, because you're not VAT registered, because your rental revenue is not VATable, you're now going to lose out 15% of VAT refunds. So the way in which SHIs do it, they try and separate the developer role from the manager role, maybe even set up two entities. And so they register the one for VAT because the grant coming in then pays for the development, and you're able to claim that back. But you guys will have to take advice on tax to be able to make the decision around whether you register for VAT or not. Let me not rather go into it into much detail. I think rather take professional advice on the VAT issue. And then obviously we've spoken about your whole motivation for wanting to be an SHI. Is another factor that will inform the type of legal form that you will take. If you're social entrepreneurial in nature, it goes without saying you're going to be an NPC. Can we move on, John? So the previous slide spoke about what type of company you should be registering and what the considerations are around raising funding, taxation. Now, the next step is to develop a memorandum of incorporation. And the key considerations or the key aspects that go into your MOI, remember, it's your company constitution. It's what you're going to live and die by as a SHI. You've got to explain who your institution is, what type of, you in the business of developing and managing social housing stock for lower income communities. Those types of things have to be there. That's your main object. It explains who your institution is, it explains what it does, and then it must talk to the powers that you vest within the chairperson of the board, the non-executive directors of the board, the executive directors of the board, and how you will conduct your business. And then also, how would you arrange your financial management systems? Those are the types of things that must go into your MOI. Can we move on, John? There's 4 key provisions that the SHRA, that the social housing regulations, these are not negotiable, right? So the one is that you must put in your main object as being providing social housing products and services for the social housing target market, which is 1850 to 22,000. The second provision that must be in your MOI is that the institution's income and assets must be applied solely to advance its main object, which is the provision of rental or cooperative housing for low to middle income households on an affordable basis, ensuring quality and maximum benefits for residents, and the management of the stock over the long term. So that clause has got to be verbatim in your MOI. Next slide, please. The next provision is that your income and assets cannot be paid to any founder, member, shareholder, director, or trustee, or beneficiary of the holder of any interest in the institution, except for reasonable remuneration for goods and services. So, for instance, the board of directors would potentially earn a board fee. It's for that type of thing that you can remunerate them on, but you cannot pay any of your income or use any of your assets to pay any of the directors. And the last clause is that on winding up, deregistration, or dissolution of the institution, the net asset must be given to social housing institution. And so we spoke about withdrawal of accreditation earlier on. And what must happen is the day you decide, I don't want to be an SHI anymore, you will apply the SHRA to have the stock transferred. And they would then select another accredited SHI to which you will transfer the net asset. So we talk about net asset because you may have raised debt over the property to cover it. You may still be owing debt over the property. And so that debt must be settled by the new SHI that is taking over the stock. And they will then only take over the net asset. And then obviously, if the institution is a municipal entity or a housing co-op, it mustn't distribute any profits to stakeholders. And if so, that distribution can only happen to advance social housing. So these are the provisions that are not negotiable. Now, guys, when you develop your MOI, you may find that there's one that the CIPC gives you. That one doesn't work. It doesn't allow you to add these provisions into it. Then you get standard ones that you can get off the internet, or your lawyer gives it to you. And generally, those are written for PTY LTDs, for profit-making companies. So if you merely take one off the shelf and you add these 4, you may still not be meeting the requirements, because in the case of the standard ones, it will talk to shareholders, it will talk to dividends and so on. And then you just add this in, and those other clauses then contradict these clauses. So please just make sure that you develop an MOI that is totally compliant, where there aren't contradictory clauses if you are going to be using something off the shelf. Can we move on, John? Okay, so I'm going to take a break now, and Paul will take over.
Hi, Hafi. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. I think now this is time where we just do some exercise so that at least we can see if we have been really understanding. And I'm only going to give you, let's say, maybe 15 minutes, and then you do not have to report back on your responses individually. I'm going to send you a link to respond to it. And then as soon as we are done, I will just do a consolidation to respond to what the answers are. And then based on that case study, here is the question for you. There's a newly established and accredited SHI, of which the first project with 300 units will be handed over on the 1st of June 2025, with the average of 3,377 per month, per unit, with a staff cost benchmark of 30% of the rental revenue. Based on that case study, you have 3 questions. The first question is, what is the appropriate governance arrangements and the structure? The second question, what is the appropriate organization structure? The last question, how and when would you gear up the organization? So those are the questions that we have. And then in the chat box, I have included a link to a Google form where you will be required to fill in your responses. Khafi, I'm not sure if I should give them 15 minutes to fill in each for them to be done, or maybe 10 minutes, and then the remaining 5 minutes while you continue, we just do a consolidation on the site. Which one works best?
Yes, I think your second one works best. And then, Paul, can we also just, after tea, right, when we have the feedback session,
Yes.
Once you've seen the forms coming in, can you select 1 or 2 of the attendees to actually present their response to us?
Okay, no, that's fine, Khafi. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. So we will come back at 10:10. Is that okay?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Has everybody got the form or the link? Can we have a hands up there?
I just resent the link in case someone missed it. Tabiso, you may it. We also have a hand from James. James, if you are able to unmute. John, I'm not sure if they're able to have access to unmute and mute their mics.
All right, I've enabled the mics now so people can unmute and ask questions.
Okay, Lucky,
Perhaps let's take Lucky, and then James in that order. Please unmute yourself, Lucky.
We can't hear Lucky.
Your mic is unmuted. I'm just not sure. Your sound is not coming through. I suggest maybe what you do, just type your question Lucky on the chat line and Paul will bring it forth. In the meantime, let us take, there was the second name, I can now remember, but I see
James.
Yuria. Oh, James. James, your hand is out. It's down. I assume that you are sorted. Let's maybe allow you, Yuria. Just unmute yourself.
Then we have Simpiwe after.
Okay, guys, I'm not sure because Yuria, can you hear us? Please unmute yourself and deposit your comment or question. Because I have enabled everyone's mics. I'm just not sure. Simpiwe, let's hear you. There you are. Just unmute yourself.
Yes, hello. Morning, everyone. I'm not sure if you can hear me very well.
Loud and clear.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for the opportunity. My name is Simpiwe. I wanted to ask, thank you for the opportunity also once again. Can I please ask, can I please request, the lady was presenting. She mentioned something about Zanele that we need to contact and all that. Personally, I don't know Zanele. And I don't have a contact details because I'm based in the Eastern Cape province, but I'm part of the meeting.
Okay. Can I step in, John? So tomorrow we're gonna have a slot where Zanele will be taking through us the accreditation process for the SHRA, and then after that presentation, we will give you guys her contact details. And the preference is that we give you the contact details after she has presented, so that you guys are now familiar with her content and you can also identify the gaps. Maybe you didn't understand something. So when you contact her knowing her and what you need directly from her. So she's gonna come in tomorrow
Sorry,
from
ma'am,
12
please
o'clock up
proceed. I think
until 20
because
minutes past 12. Simple?
Yes, ma'am, can I ask a second question, please?
Okay, thank you.
My second question would be, how do we go about? I think the lady was presenting, but it's a bit we didn't get a chance to. I think she was rushing because of time. I didn't get how do you go about? For example, in my case, we are in the Eastern Cape province. So can we are we able to start this project in the rural area, or maybe are we only allowed to start it in the urban areas? So I didn't get that clearly. Or that part, where can we establish can you establish it anywhere, or maybe there are specific areas where you can start that you can establish a product. Can I just get a clarity on that? Where can we actually establish a project? Which areas?
Okay. I think we are
Thank
missing you, but I also think I got what your question is, and then maybe Khafi will help me if she feel like I missed something. So, Simpiwe, we prefer for social housing to be built in the restructuring zones, ne? And restructuring zones are usually in the urban areas, not even only urban, but they are closer to they give the elements of the spatial elements, the economic, the social. So that's what makes sense for social housing. It is never in the rural areas. And then if you are in Eastern Cape, let's say maybe you are in Buffalo City, you can always go to the municipality to ask them if they have restructuring zones. And if on those restructuring zones they have vacant land that they are open for tender work or for sale or for anything, you can just do that. And then if you also have a land that you have marked somewhere, but you are not sure if it falls within the restructuring zones, I would advise that you share with us the address or the ELF number of that land, so that John and myself can check for you if it falls within the restructuring zone. Thank you.
Okay. It's not a problem. Then also, do you guys provide funding only, or you just ask these people, or if I want to establish this project, do I need to find funding for myself? Or if I find a land, do I need to approach you guys and say, no, I've got this particular land in a certain area? Not sure if I'm clear enough.
Okay, I think you are clear. John, can you please help Simpiwe there with that question? Simpiwe, just in a nutshell, ne, the SHRA does offer grants for you to establish your social housing building or project. Ne? They would give you a subsidy that we call a CCG. It is between, I think the maximum is 428,000. And then if you are in SHI, you need to come with a 15% of equity, I mean debt of debt, and then the equity is optional. But if you are in ODA, you need to have equity, you need to have debt funding, you need that grant from the SHRA. But John can also step in to help us with that.
Okay. So yeah,
no, it's not a
I think that's all this pertains to the concept itself, the broad concept of what social housing is. And we've got in fact 4 sessions that are scheduled on this topic. I'd be hesitant for us to go in depth with that, but I think Paul is spot on in terms of targeted areas where development has to happen, and what are the funding mechanisms that are in place broadly, or the requisite funding mechanisms that one would need to have in place to facilitate the development of social housing in nature. We delve into greater detail than just that, in the session called Introduction to Social Housing. Now, if you go to our website, the training page, there's a schedule there. And if you choose a topic called Introduction to Social Housing, I know that we have not as yet loaded the dates. There are just a few things that we needed to iron out internally, and we have just finalized those. So I think from next week, I'd advise anyone who wants to join for the Introduction to Social Housing to go onto their website and register for that topic. We will be unpacking a whole lot of things. I mean, among others is the legislative framework. What laws are in place that informs a program such as this. But beyond just the laws, we will be looking at that session on the institutional arrangements. The topic that we are looking at today, for an example, is in a social housing institution, how you establish and operate a social is, but among others, the institutional arrangements that you need to have. So that will be covered there as well. Beyond that, we also would be covering the financial consideration or financial modeling of the business as well. So yeah, we're unpacking that animal in great detail, and I would encourage anyone who's still unclear about what social housing is, how do you play if you are keen on being a stakeholder, a delivery partner. Join us for that, register for that, and join us for that. The dates of that, as I say, will be uploaded in a week's time or so. I think that for now, I'd rather we'd leave it there for creating more confusion. Did we deal with, was that Simpiwe, right? Mpho, did you then deal? Did you? Thanks.
Can I be afforded just one more opportunity to ask one last question? That will be my last question. My last question will be: what is the role of municipality on this project? That's number one. What is the role of each municipality? For example, in our case, is PCM. Is there anything that that has to do via municipality, or everything just goes straight to from me, for example, from me to you guys, or do we involve a municipality? That's number one. Then number two, is there any WhatsApp group?
Simpiwe.
Hello, ma'am.
One has advised you that there is another training program called Introduction to Social Housing. All these questions that you have will come out of that training. I suggest that you attend that training because all the questions you have are going to be addressed in that particular training.
Okay, it's fine, no problem.
Thanks.
Yeah. So pertaining to this process of you wanting to be an accredited social housing, there is very little, if any, role that municipality has to play in regard to how do you package a social housing accreditation application. There's very little. I mean, the only area things that that comes to mind pertains to, could be to do with them, and you attaining a project opportunity or land. But that's as far as their role goes in terms of this process. So I guess then we have dealt with Simpiwe's, and I'm not sure, Mpho, did you, because I had to step away from the machine for a second. Did you manage to bring forth Lucky's thing from the chat as advised?
So Lucky, let me go up. I had to go down because I was doing so Lucky is saying we have 5 land that we are interested in, and we have not decided which one to take for social housing development. Our aim is to select a land or a property with the right socio market, right legal issues, right physical structure, and the right financial issues. We are trying to avoid challenges such as the rental boycott, building hijacking, construction mafias. So we are struggling Yeah, so we are going to need your assistance when deciding on the property or land to develop social housing in. That is lucky for us, John. Lucky, I see your hand is still up. Is there anything else that I left off?
Don't think he would be able to respond, so I'm assuming that hand is a legacy one. I mean, just to the issue of land and how do you identify an ideal project or land for that? I think the bottom line is that it's got to be in a restructuring zone. That is a non-negotiable, and any social housing investment in terms of the CCG or project being considered for CCG funding, that project has to sit in a restructuring zone. Now we have a whole long list of restructuring zones that have been gazetted by the Minister of Human Settlements that can be made available. In fact, I could add it as part of the handouts to the thing. Yeah, I mean, when you now come into, what the potential of that land would be in terms of yield, whether it would be viable and not, I think these are things that we then look into deeply at the project packaging training. That's a separate topic. And I would think that it would be of value if anyone, including Lucky, needs more insight in terms of how do you identify a project that would work or project site that would work. What are the considerations? Because in that training, project packaging, we're not only looking at technical feasibility elements such as land, the demand, the site layout and things like that, but we go deeper also and just unpack the financial modeling of a potential social housing project as well. So do make a note to also keep an eye on the schedule. We have not as yet loaded those dates on that project packaging, what you call project packaging training. So give it some time. I think not next week, but maybe week after next, we should have those dates up and on the thing, and then you can enlist yourself for that topic as well. There was a hand from Nkabelo. If I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Nkabelo, if you're just able to unmute yourself and maybe pose your question or comment.
Hi, thanks, Ndatempo. My question basically is from what we heard from the presenter just before you, that there are different types of companies that we could register for this SHI activity. Now, my question is, as of now, we attended this meeting under a certain company. But if I feel that, maybe because of the PTY suffix thing, is not going to be beneficial, is not going to help, is not going to work on this NHI, what should I do? I mean, my question is basically is, when we apply now for accreditation, are we going to apply as the individuals that actually attended this training, or is still going to be under this company that is a PTY, of which maybe by then I won't be interested in utilizing it on the SHI? I hope my question is clear.
Hi, John, can I respond?
Oh, yes, Rafi, please go ahead.
Okay. So you've registered a company already, and you've registered a PTY, and having heard what the benefits and are of an NPC, you're wanting to convert it to an NPC. You can actually do that. You don't have to, let that company go. You can apply to the CIPC to change the company from a PTY Ltd to a NPC. And then you could also change your MOI So those are the two things that I would advise you to do, because you are seeing the benefits of becoming an SHI. And no, you won't be applying as an individual. You will be applying as the company. And you would have to have a board of directors. Our next session just after tea is going to touch on what type of skills your board of directors need to be. So just hang 10 with that. We're going to cover that soon after we come back from tea. But yes, don't waste the money on registering another company. Use that company that you've got and just change its typology. You are allowed to do that. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, very well. Thank you so much.
Paul, how are we doing in terms of responses? We have about 80 people in the room.
So up to so far, I only have like 11 responses for the case study.
Guys, can you just raise your hands or give me a thumbs up sign to say you are busy or you are almost complete, or if you're not going to be completing the exercise, it's to your benefit, guys. If you are interested and serious about joining the program, it's going to be very helpful for you guys to do the case study. There's a hands up here. John, Llewellyn. Llewellyn, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My question is actually referring back to the previous question that was raised in regards to PTY Limited. I've also heard in your presentation that OD, what is the other option? The private developers where 25% ODA.
Yes.
So when you are PTY Limited, and you've got 25% of your development that goes for commercial, then you can still continue with your PTY Limited to apply on the ODA. Am I right or am I wrong? You don't have to change your company structure in order to qualify by SHRA. Am I correct or am I wrong? Do you need to change it to do 25% commercial and 75% social housing?
So on the basis of a SHI, yes, you can do up to 25% of your business that includes other use, so commercial revenue. As long as it doesn't exceed the 25% revenue, you can be an NPC, you can enjoy tax exemption. On the other hand, if you're wanting to be an ODA, you are a profit-making company, you are PTY Ltd. In that case, you would not qualify for tax exemption, even if you're doing 75% social housing. You will still not qualify for tax exemption because you are PTY Ltd. So it's only an SHI that can apply for tax exemption as a public benefit organization. But then it can't exceed commercial revenue of 25%. Does that help you? Does it answer your question?
I think it answers my question. Thank you so much.
Okay. It's important, guys, because it helps you then decide, you know, which type of entity to go for. And just to add, Llewellyn, if you're an ODA, you have to make a 20% equity contribution towards your social housing project. And it's a cash equity injection. So that is another factor that comes into play in the financial model. Between an SHI is not required to put in any equity, so they merely get the 65% grant and 35% debt. Whereas an ODA, the model is 65% grant, so the same amount of grant as an SHI, but they've got to put in 20% equity and take 15% debt.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, thank you for that answer.
Okay. Paul, I think we need to focus on the case study now because we've almost dealt with the next section, which was going to be reflection. I am still asking the question as to whether people are intending to complete the questionnaire. If not, then we can move on to the next item on the agenda, because it senses us waiting and then no one is prepared to complete the case study.
Okay, no, that's fine, Khafi. And then what we can also do is that during the tea break that we're gonna take, if maybe one of them or others feel like they have an extra 2 minutes, they can also just use the time to go through it. So that when we come back with the reflection and feedback session, when we present the answers, at least we have people that have also just contributed more.
Okay, so
So
I'm
I
just
think we can continue.
Yeah, I'm going to continue for the next 5 minutes. John, if you can move us to the next slide. Next one. So the first requirement for accreditation around good governance, which is your third key performance area, is that you need to have an internal management policy. Now, the internal management policy needs to cover a few items. The first thing is, how are you going to deal with strategic or general management? So what is your business planning process going to be? Essentially, in the social housing space, we develop 5-year strategic business plans. So in year 4 of the 5 years, you should be doing strategic planning in every 4-year cycle, so that you do have a 5-year plan in place at any given time. And that really sets your strategic direction. It also sets the different types of plans. What is your organizational plan? What is your project development plan going to be? You've assessed your risk, you've assessed the market, and it informs your next 5-year trajectory. Linked to that, you would also be talking to annual business planning. So within the 5 years, every year you should be reviewing how did your year 1 of your 5-year plan go? And if it didn't go well, what do you need to change, or what changes do you need to make to give you direction for the next 12 months? And these are generally linked to your financial year end. Three months before your year end, your board should be sitting. They should be looking at a strategic review of your performance of the last 12 months, and they should be saying, well, in the next 12 months, this is what we do. It's also a requirement of SHRA that you submit these plans on a 5-yearly and 1-yearly basis to the SHRA for approval. You have to talk about how you're going to organize, how you're going to take decisions, not only as the board, but also as management, and how you're going to review your operating system. So you would have now started your SHI in 2024. You would have written a tenant management policy or a client services management policy. How soon are you going to review that? Because if you're doing your first project and you're going to be letting and doing letting management in the next 2 years, and you find that, well, the policy didn't quite address the leasing of units properly, and you want to make some changes to improve it, how often are you going to review these policies that you would have developed when you applied for accreditation or when you established your business? So those are the types of things that the strategic management chapter should cover. The next element is about information and communication management, and they're two very separate things, I may say. So how are you going to deal with information management? How are you going to generate data? How are you going to store that data? How are you going to organize the data to use it to make decisions, or to use it to analyze how you're performing as an SHI? And then how is it going to inform decision making? Now, here also the POPI Act comes into play, because you're dealing with tenants' ID numbers, you're dealing with ID numbers of the minors of the household. So you must also remember you're in a heavy regulated environment when you're dealing with information, especially around how you use it and how you disseminate it. So it's a very important one. And also what the SHRA would like to see is, so what type of systems, business information system, are you going to use to be able to generate data, analyze it, and use it, and store it, and so on? So that's really around information management. from a communication management point of view, is what is your communication policy going to say? Who can communicate? What can they communicate? When must they communicate? What type of media are you going to use? So general communication around the organization. Generally in social housing, we say to ourselves, if we can get any free publicity when we are building a project, we'll use that. Annually, we will produce an annual report after our annual financial statements are approved by the board. We will do a little bit of a annual report that we'll distribute to our key stakeholders, like the Shrine, the province, and so on. Also, how are we going to communicate internally? What institutional arrangements do we want? Do we want to have a quarterly meeting between ourselves and the SHRA as our funder and as our regulator? Do we want to attend PSC meetings at the province and meet the municipality there and have our discussions around projects and troubleshooting that we may need? What type of internal and external formal fora would we create so that we're not dealing in a haphazard fashion? That is what should be in that policy. Can we move on, John? The next element of the internal management policy is an entire suite of human resources policies. How are we going to design our organization and build on the structure? What is our recruitment, selection, appointment, and induction policy? How are we going to comply with labor legislation? It's a biggie, guys. It's the Labor Relations Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. It is a whole lot of a plethora of things that we have to comply with when it comes to staff. How are we going to do our HR administration? How are we going to deal with grievances, disciplinaries, termination? How are we going to develop our staff and give them training? How are we going to monitor their performance from a staff performance point of view? All of those policies need to be, and procedures need to be included in this section of this policy. And then lastly, the SHRA wants to see an anti-discrimination policy. So in terms of Section 9 of the Constitution, how are we going to not discriminate against these groups that are mentioned in Section 9? And so this could be a separate policy, but I'm suggesting that you just make it part of your internal management policy. So all your back office stuff is contained in one policy. If staff are not sure about, you can refer them to this one policy. They would find everything they need. So that's the first requirement, is this one policy called the internal management policy that covers strategic management, covers communication and document management, covers HR management and anti-discrimination. Can we move on, John? And then lastly, the last part of this policy, which could be part of the internal management policy or a separate one, it's called the monitoring and evaluation policy, but it could also be organization performance management policy. So this is where you set your KPIs and your thresholds. What are the key things that a social housing institution needs to look at? For me, the first thing is growth. How many units are we going to grow per annum or per every 2 years or per every 3 years? That is an important one. And then on rent collection, because our revenue is rent, right? So surely on rent setting and rent collection, we should be having a KPI and a threshold to meet. On vacancy, because vacancy is a killer, guys. You can't afford vacancies. So there's those types of indicators that are important. You need to set the indicators, but more than that, you also need to then set the system by which you're going to monitor it. Who's going to collect that data? Who's going to make sure that there's a KPI schedule with thresholds and your actual performance against those thresholds? And if they're not met, what are you going to do as management, and what are you going to do as the board to ensure that KPIs that are not met are dealt with? So there's a system of setting up the system. There's a system of how do we monitor it, and there's a system on how do we report on it, and then where we're not performing, what is the decision making that needs to take place. It's really about that. That is the framework for organizational performance management. And remember, this has got nothing to do with staff performance management. It's got nothing to do with performance of the board. Those are separate evaluations at those levels. This is looking at an organization. How are we doing? What should we be meeting to be able to be viable and sustainable as an organization? This is the last part of the internal management policy that you require. Can we move on, John? The next requirement is that you have a legal compliance policy, a register, and a reporting system in place. So legal compliance is about all the legislation that you will be subject to as a social housing institution. Now here you would need to go back to say, I acquire land. What are the pieces of legislation that affects acquisition? I'm also a developer of land and buildings. What are the building regulations and the legislative requirements around development? There's the Land Use Management Act. There's the SPLUMA Act, which is your town planning stuff. There's the building regulations when you're actually into the construction phase. There's the NHBRC registration that you have to do in terms of that act. So there's many pieces of legislation as a developer that you need to comply with. Then as an owner of social housing stock, what is the legislation, the health and safety regulations and so on that you need to comply with as an owner of a property? And then lastly, as a manager of social housing stock, the Rental Act comes into play because it regulates the relationship between the tenants and the landlords. You're dealing with tenant personal information. The POPI Act comes into play. The Social Housing Act comes into play because the regulations require you to manage the property in a very particular way. And you have staff in place. So what does the HR legislation say in terms of compliance with the staff that you have? From a finance management point of view, there's taxation legislation that you have to comply with. From an IT point of view, there's IT legislation that you have to comply with. From a company point of view, there's the Companies Act that also prescribes things on you. And then also there's the guidelines for good governance, which is your King 4 code of good governance that you would like to adopt, as well as something that you would like to comply with. So there's much legislation that you have to comply with as a social housing institution. The SHRA wants to see how are you going to comply with legislation. How are you going to go about? Who's responsible for it? What are you going to do? How are you going to get some type of reporting system in place, external assurance? Generally, we say to SHIs, because you're constrained with income, just make it part of your audited financial statement package that you get from your external auditors, and let them do a spot check on legal compliance so that you know at least there is, that is in place. Then you've got to keep a register, and that register should essentially, so you have to produce this register up front to say, these are the legislation that I identified, these are the provisions within the legislation that is applicable to me. And yes, I'm compliant, or no, I'm not compliant. You also need to have in that register is what is the penalties that will apply if you are not compliant. So if it is that it's a criminal offense and you can face jail time, or it's a penalty that you're going to have to pay if you're not compliant, just so that the SHRA can see you aware of this is the suite of legislation. These are the provisions within each act that you need to comply with. This is the penalty that would apply if you don't comply. And you can then say, I'm compliant or I'm not compliant, and sign off that register. The register and the report could be one document, because the last piece where you say I'm compliant as at this date begins to say this is my report as well. So make it easy for you guys, have a policy in place with a procedure, and then have a separate register and reporting system in place that you can update once a year when you actually do this. And also make sure that you have some type of internal insurance. Generally, your finance manager will be responsible for this as well, and that your external auditor comes and does a spot check, so you have some type of external assurance. And so that's the second policy that is required, but also linked to that is this register and report that is required. Can we move on, please? John, I actually think I should stop because we just over 10:30. Can we take a 15-minute break, and that can take us to 35 to 10 to 11. Are you okay with that?
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
So yeah, happy to do that. I think let's just take a comfort break. You said what until what time, Hafi?
10 to 11.
10 to 11.
10 to
Okay.
11.
Don't log out. Don't exit the meeting. We will continue in the next 15 minutes. Right.
Paul, can you tell me how we're doing in terms of the case study?
We are on 26. At least they are now coming up. We are on 26.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is when we come back, I'm going to carry on up to the point of, I think it's organization, right? And when I get to that point, if you can stop me, and then if you can select one or two people that have responded, then if you can engage them before you ask them to present their responses to us.
Okay,
And
no,
then
that's
we can,
fine.
yeah, a short discussion around what, what should they have looked at.
Okay, I'll do that, Hafi.
So Paul, at that point in time, I would need the presentation to go down. I would need the answer sheet to come up. Is that doable on John's side?
I can share with. No,
Has John got it?
no, John doesn't have it. So it's a we used Google Form.
No,
and then
no, I'm talking. Okay, so we don't really have to see the actual response. I'm talking
okay,
about
you
the
want the
Excel.
summary.
No, I want the Excel spreadsheet that I sent you yesterday with the
Okay.
model answer.
Okay, no, that's fine.
So then we want the presentation to go down, and we want the Excel sheet to come up.
Okay, let me forward it to John.
Yeah. So Umpo, just to be clear, what happens is then you're going to select two people that have responded, and they will present. You will ask them to present. So you need to inform them way before that you have selected those two. They must present their answers, and we don't have to see the form. They can just talk to us. And then after that, John must put the model answer up, and then I will talk to it.
Okay. No, that's fine,
Thanks.
Hafi.
Thank you.
Okay, we are back at 10:15. Eh?
Hi guys. John, are you guys back? Mpo?
I'm here, Hafi.
Okay. Can some of us just give us hands up to say we're back, we're fine, I can start. I also just want to say that I'm going to put my camera on for a short while. I should have done that this morning. I forgot. Just so that you can put a face to the person that's been talking too much.
I was wondering why.
Shame, John. I forgot, man. I always try to remember, and then I do always forget. So it's rainy East London and cold East London today.
Oh no, in this
Yeah.
heat in Johannesburg.
Sure. But is there not another cold front coming?
Well, I heard something on the media that there is one hitting Western Cape, and it might also come up to the inland.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to proceed, guys. I see there's many hands up. Are those hands up for questions, or are they just saying we're fine, we can start? Awonke, are you having a question, or are you saying it's okay to start? Okay, we're fine. So the next policy that is required is a fraud and corruption policy or system. You really need to indicate what the scope of your policy is, what does it cover, who is responsible for it. Remember, guys, you're not going to be able to afford a fraud and corruption staff member or a risk management staff member or a staff member for HR even when you start out. Generally, your finance manager is going to cover HR, IT, governance support, and all of those things until you get to 2, 3, 4,000 units where you can afford positions and your rental income is more stable and has increased, and you're starting to liquidate some of your debt. You will be able to afford such positions. And you would need specialized people because of the size of your organization. But when you're starting up, guys, you can't afford all of this. So all your back office stuff has just got to be linked into that finance functional area. You'll see, we'll talk to it a little later on. And so it's not as if for each of these policies you're going to have a separate person that is responsible. So generally, the custodian will be your finance person. And again, it's just good to have internal assurance via your finance manager that will do some internal audits. And then also an external assurance person that will come in. Now, you could be having an external auditor that comes in to do your internal audits that can give you external assurance. But there's smart ways of organizing these things, and you have to find those smart ways of doing it. You also have to have something on your website that allows whistleblowers to report and register. And your policy must indicate how are you going to deal with whistleblowing, but also to talk to how how you're going to deal with it from a confidentiality point of view, and how are you going to protect that person that has actually reported fraud and corruption. And then the main thing of the policy is to have if there's breach that happens, how are you going to deal with that non-compliance? Important that you also have a system in place for dealing with breach. And remember, breach has a number of aspects to it. One, there would be criminal behavior, which needs to then be reported to the police and so on. There's HR implications if it's a staff member, and how do you move through the disciplinary process. And then obviously the non-executive directors, if there's breach or fraud and corruption found within the board of directors that are non-executive, how will you deal with that? Because they do not have employment contracts. They do not form part of your HR policy. So your breach system should cover those three categories of criminality, how to deal with staff that are in breach, and how to deal with non-executive directors that are in breach. And with the staff one, it's easy just to refer to the disciplinary code in the HR policy. But for the directors, you need to be more clear on how you're going to deal with them. And then obviously with criminality, how are you going to report and register the case and so on? And what steps are you going to do to recover if there's anything that was used, if there was maladministration or mismanagement? The next policy, John, can we move on? The next governance policy that you require is your board charter. Now, remember that you have an MOI, which is your constitution, but it's very high level at a company level, what your business is all about. And how are you going to conduct your governance arrangements at a high level? Your board charter is going to be a bit more specific. It's going to begin to unpack the roles in detail, roles and responsibilities of the board, the chairperson of the board, and the CEO, to whom delegated authority will be granted, and they could also be committees, right? So the roles and responsibilities of the committees will also then be required. So that needs to be clear. Then accountability, and how will that happen? Who's accountable to who, and how will that happen? And then from a delegation point of view, So what is delegated to the board committees? What is delegated to the CEO? And how will that delegation work? Then there's a requirement that there's an annual assessment of effectiveness of the board. So there has to be an annual performance assessment of the board. And how are you going to do it? Is it going to be an independent external person that comes to do the assessment, or who's going to administer such a questionnaire? It becomes difficult if you do it internally because the chairperson could drive that, but then who's going to drive the assessment of the chairperson? So it's better if you do it with an external person who then does an assessment and gives you an independent review of the performance of the board. And so merely it would be a questionnaire, but the important thing is for you to explain what do you do with the information after you've got it back. If it's found that the board was ineffective, didn't perform, what are you going to do about it? If it's found that there are areas that require improvement, how are you going to take decisions to make that improvement? So it's not just saying, I'm going to have a questionnaire, I'm going to have an external person do it for me, and then what? So you need to explain the whole system. And then obviously the meetings, what constitutes a quorum, how frequent will meetings happen, when is the AGM going to happen, how much notice are you going to give to inform directors of a meeting? How soon is the minutes of the meeting going to be distributed to directors? All of those things need to be set out in the board charter. But remember, if there's anything that's duplicated from the MOI into the board charter, please ensure that it's aligned. One thing where I find as an assessor, the MOI will say will be a maximum of 7 directors. Then the board charter says, but will be a maximum of 11 directors. What is it? Is it 7 or is it 11? So also just make sure that if there's any duplication between the two, that there is alignment between the two. Can we move on? The next thing is the code of conduct that you need to have, or code of ethics, as you may also understand it to be. And it needs to cover a number of items. So besides it also covers the objectives of the policy and the aim and who's responsible for it and so on. It needs to cover these few things. So it needs to cover conflict of interest, what constitutes a conflict of interest and how it will be managed. Now, it's important that you also understand that the non-executive directors cannot do business with the SHI. They are not, their independence will be put into question. So this provision that some of the SHIs bring in to say, you can do business, you must just recuse yourself from decision making. The social housing regulations do not allow that. You're either non-executive director or you're a service provider or you're a staff member. But you can't have all three together happening and saying that there's a clause that allows you to do these things. So please be sure that you don't make those provisions. The other important one that I always raise is the fact that you can't have public servants or people holding political office in your board of directors. So that is a requirement of the Social Housing Act. The second important aspect is the protection of assets. And guys, please remember, this is not only about the finance, the money of the SHI that you're trying to protect. There's other resources and equipment that you also need to protect. How do people use the internet or use their laptops and their computers and their phones, if it is company phones, to surf the web and do private stuff using the company's resources? All of those things need to be covered here. How do staff and directors use the assets of the company? What are they allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? Confidential information has got to be covered as well. So who can speak to what? The chairperson can speak to the press. The CEO can speak to the press. Who can and who can't, and how do you deal with confidentiality and communication? Employment practices, again, it's about fair, equitable, open, transparency, all those good things which should be covered in your HR policy, but should also just be highlighted in the code of ethics. Then obligations relative to fair dealings with clients and suppliers. How are you going to operate? Are you going to accept gifts and donations from suppliers to your company? If so, what are the conditionalities under which it will happen? What type of code of ethics are you expecting from your suppliers and your service providers and from your tenants themselves? Do you want to do business with someone that has been blacklisted by National Treasury? No, you wouldn't want to do that. So this is where you're going to cover those types of things. And then lastly, the code of ethics must cover a breach system. So again, it's the same like the fraud and corruption policy. How are you going to deal with breach? For employees, for non-executive directors, and for tenants, and for suppliers to you or service providers to you. What is the system of breach? So, and they'll be different because, I mean, for staff, it's easy. You go back to the HR policy. For directors, because they're not employed, you have a different system or mechanism. For service providers, it would end, it could end up in termination of their contracts with you. And for tenants, it could mean that you cancel and terminating a lease agreement. So that's the worst case scenario of each of those. Can we move on? So that's the code of conduct, another important governance policy. Then the SHRA wants to see the letters of appointment for the directors and the management. So we're talking about non-executive directors, which will have a different type of letter of appointment to that of the senior management, which will have a more of a employment type of letter of appointment. But it could be that your CEO is an executive director as well. Sorry. So in that case, then it will be an employment letter of appointment. But what the SHRA wants to see is that directors and senior management have an undertaking in their letter of appointment that they will comply with the code of conduct. There will be a link to the board charter for executive directors and non-executive directors. There must also be a provision for non-discrimination. Remember, we had that anti-discrimination policy that we would have had. That whatever's in that policy, a summary of an overview and undertaking of non-discrimination in that regard has to be included. And then the setting of key result areas and performance standards. So in the letter of non-executive directors, I mean, if you have 4 strategic goals and it's around growth, organization direction, provision of good services, on those will be the KRAs for the board of directors that they would have to be advancing as the directors. And there could be performance standards linked to it. So if you're saying over the next 5 years, we're going to grow by 1,000 units, we're going to deliver 1,000 units, that should be in the letter of appointment for the next 5 years for the board of directors to say each director must then contribute towards that, ensuring that that happens. So those are the types of things that is required in the letters of appointment. Can we move on? Then the board of directors themselves did we skip a slide, John? Or is this the next slide? Yeah, we're on this one. So the board of directors, so what is required in terms of skills on the board of directors? The social housing regulations require that there's a legal skill, that there's a finance skill, that there's a built environment. So anyone from the built environment, it could be an architect, it could be a town planner, it could be a QS, it could be an engineer, that type of person. Then a property management person. And if you can have someone that is actually have managed social housing stock, it would be a bonus, but it is difficult to find. So someone that is just have general property management experience. And then the last skill is HR management. So those are the 5 skills that you need to have on the board. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to have 5 board members, right? It's always good to have a uneven number so that when you take decisions, you don't have a deadlock with an even number. It is better if you find 5 people with those particular skills, but you could have a property management and a property development person in one person. meaning then you can reduce your board to 3 people because the finance person also has HR qualifications and skills. So what the SHRA looks at is skills first. So what is the qualifications of that person? And secondly, it looks at experience. So it doesn't look at skills in isolation of experience as well. It looks at both. But first, it looks at the qualifications. So that's who you need to have represented on your board of directors. Now, the other thing that I want to say is that the majority of your board, in terms of King 4, needs to be non-executive directors. So you could have 4 non-executive directors and 1 executive director. You could have 3 non-executive directors and 2 executive directors at the most. But remember, as a starting SHI doing your first project, you can't afford 2 executive directors. You can barely afford the CEO. So if you want to have an executive director, potentially it would be your CEO. At a later stage, when you have about 3,000 to 4,000 units, you could make your CFO, your finance manager could become a CFO, and your CFO could be an executive director with the CEO. At that point, you would then have 2 executive directors. But in social housing, we don't see more than that scenario playing itself out, even within the big SHIs. We also look at the transformation profile, that there's women representation, that there's youth representation, that there's people with special needs represented on your board. So it's important that you also look at the transformation profile. And then your chairperson has got to be independent. In fact, all of your non-executive directors have to be independent. What do we mean by independence? We mean that they must not be doing business with the SHI. They must not be sitting on a board of directors of another SHI. They must not be in the employ of another SHI. That is what we mean by independent. We also say that the chairperson of the board and the CEO are 2 separate positions. It cannot be the same person. Because remember, why do you have a board of directors? Is to provide oversight and strategic direction. So essentially, you should have a manager that's responsible for finance and legal or property development or property management, management team. When they report to the board, there should be someone of equal understanding or better understanding than that manager to be able to say, no, but you're reporting now, this thing doesn't make sense. If the finance manager reports to the board that the rent collection rate is 95% or it's 85%, but it's fine because it's moving in the right direction. The finance person on the board must be able to take that report and say, no, but this is not making sense. You are not reporting correctly. This is not the direction that we're moving into. That's just an example of the fact that you need to have an oversight, that body with these skills that is of superior knowledge to the management team so that they can provide proper oversight and they can provide strategic direction to the management team. Can we move on? The next requirement is that you have a risk management system in place. So there should be a risk management policy in place, and there should also be a risk register or a risk matrix. So the risk management policy has really got to identify who's going to be responsible for managing the risk, what is the aim of the policy, how are risks going to be management, what are you going to tolerate in terms of risks that you can tolerate as an organization and what you can't tolerate. And so that policy must be clear, and it should also have a bit of an external assurance piece into it. So that's your risk management policy. Then your risk management register must now identify actual risks. So if I'm you, I'm sitting as you in this room as a new starting SHI, what are the key risks that I am going to be facing as an SHI? Firstly, probably from a staffing point of view, from a board point of view, we're going to need training because we're new to the sector. We don't understand the social housing model. We want to be accredited. We want to do a first project. How do we gear up our board and our first staff that we hire to understand social housing and to become skilled in managing a social housing institution? If you look at a market point of view, how are we going to build projects in the right place where there is a market for social housing? From a tenant point of view, how are we going to avoid rent boycotts? How are we going to avoid antisocial behavior when our tenants come into our projects? How are we going to raise funding for our first project? You know, we're going to get the grant, yes, but then we have to get debt funding. At what price and at what cost? Because we know rental revenue is constrained. Those are the type of key risks that a new SHI would face. The current economic environment, the current political environment, those are things that impact our starting into this business. And that is what one would want to see in the risk register. Is it an internal or external risk? What is the degree of control that we have over it? What is the rating and ranking? If it's something that's a high risk, how are we going to mitigate against that risk? Who's going to be responsible for mitigating that risk? What is it in our plan that talks to that risk mitigation strategy that we may have around a particular risk? Those are the things that we want to see in the risk register. Can we move on, John? Can we move to the next slide? And then there are a few other items that is linked to, can you move back, John, to good governance? The SHRA wants to see a tax spin. Can you move back one? Another one? The SHRA wants to see a tax spin, so to see that your company is compliant from a taxation point of view and at least registered as a taxpayer with the necessary tax registrations. If you are an NPC, the SHRA wants to see your tax exemption certificate. Now remember, with this year, you've got to apply to the SARS for it. And SARS takes about 55 days to come back to you. Now, it may be at the time that you apply for accreditation, you've just put in an application to SARS and you are waiting for the response. And so you may say to the SHRA, look, I'm giving you the acknowledgement of receipt from SARS that I've applied for tax exemption, and I will let you have the tax exemption certificate when it comes from the SARS. So it could be that at the point of application, you only have that acknowledgement that you've submitted an application. You've got to put your BEE status. In the case of a starting SHI that hasn't really traded yet, it will probably be a sworn affidavit. And then linked, there is a form that the SHRA will provide you in the application pack, where you will fill in the transformation profile of your board in terms of youth, women, and special needs representation. And then there's a blanket resolution that is required that indicates that all the policies that you've presented to the SHRA for accreditation and your strategic business plan and the appointment of your board of directors have been resolved, that this is, you know, the board has approved it. So there's a resolution in place to say the board has approved all of this, and it has also supported the submission of the application for accreditation by the CEO. So that is what that board resolution should look like, and the board should have applied its mind. So what happens, guys? You guys would either sit and try and develop all these policies on your own, or you would hire a consultant to develop it for you. And the board would not even look at it. They would not even have convened. And one person sitting in the corner would have submitted all of this to the SHRA. And then when it's not approved because it's not of good quality, the SHRA will ask the question, but did the board approve this thing? You gave me a board resolution that says they did approve all of this. But how could they have approved it if its quality is so bad? Right? So please be mindful that if you do it yourself, your entire board must have approved it and read everything in every document that you submit to the SHRA. Whether you developed it yourself or you got a consultant to do it, it is the board's responsibility to vet it and to approve it before it can be submitted to the SHRA. Otherwise, you're just going to be declined down the line. Can we move on? So the next big thing that the that the social housing regulations require is that you have a 5-year strategic business plan in place, and that it's supported by a 1-year annual business plan, which is the first year's annual plan for that 5-year plan. And so the first chapter has got to cover the strategic framework. What is your vision? What is your mission? What values are you going to espouse and your guiding principles? What type of organization are you building? What is the organizational culture? What are your strategic goals and the KPIs? So I want to talk about the vision and mission. Guys, people craft wonderful visions. I'm going to be the leading social housing institution in South Africa or in the world. Guys, you're starting out. There are leading SHIs that are way ahead of you for the last 20 years. In 5 years, how is it possible that you're going to do that? Unless you have a huge budget behind you for research and innovation, and you have an extremely well-skilled and well-experienced social housing board of directors, it's highly unlikely that you're going to become the best SHI in the country or in the world. Or if you're in the city of Johannesburg, for instance, or Cape Town, even the best SHI in Cape Town or Johannesburg, highly unlikely. Guys, be realistic about, yes, it must be stretched. You must set yourself something that stretches you, but let it also be to a certain degree realistic and not unrealistic. And then from a values and guiding principles point of view, remember we spoke about you being an altruistic type of a community builder type of organization, all those good things, let that be espoused in there. You're not a profit motive, a type of business. So those values and guiding principles that link to profit-making institutions are not relevant to us. Choose them well and choose them as something that you're going to live by. Because at the end of the day, the board of directors and the CEO must ensure that the organization is built on those principles and those values. The same with the organizational culture. When you're starting out to a small, lean and mean business, it's very a flat structure, that type of thing, teamwork approach, results-driven orientation. Those are the types of organizational cultures that you're going to need within your organization. Then on the strategic goals, guys, for me, for any new starting SHIs, I say there's 4 or 5 that are almost like they're not negotiable or not changeable. The first strategic goal has got to be around growth. You must be able to want to grow your portfolio of social housing stock. Because without stock, you're actually not a business. You're nothing. Because unless you have a first project under your belt or 1 or 2 projects under your belt, you actually don't have a business. So becoming accredited and getting to grow your portfolio of social housing stock should be a first goal. And it should be clear, it should be results driven. It should say, I'm going to build 300 units in the next 5 years. As simple as that. And then you'll unpack a program that would, see that is, you'll begin to say, I've acquired the land, it's earth number so-and-so. I've packaged the land, I'm dealing with town planning, I'm dealing with bulk services availability, I'm procuring the contractor, the construction will happen at this point in time. Now there's a clear program of action under that strategic goal that says I'm growing by 300 units. You know that you've got to acquire the land. You know that you've got to deal with the packaging of the land, which is mainly the town planning issues and getting the funding in place. You know that you're going to have to construct the actual project and hand it over. Those are the key programs that will fall under that strategic goal linked to growth. The second goal is really about building your organization. Because you're a new organization, that organization needs to gear up. It needs to be more than that board of directors that started out with this idea to come into social housing. It's got to start having staff in place. Those staff have to be developed. Those staff have to start doing jobs, right? So how do you build that business? And that business is not only about staff. It's also about the operating systems. So the policies that you have in place that you would have developed for accreditation, that has got to be a second part of the second strategic goal. The third element is how you're going to set up your offices. Where are your offices going to be? What type of office infrastructure are you going to have? The fourth part of your second strategic goal of building your business is really around institutional arrangements. Because with social housing, an SHI can't do anything on its own. You are dependent on the SHRA for the capital grant. You are dependent on banks for the debt portion. Or if you're an ODA, you're dependent on equity partners that will bring in own equity, right? So you're dependent on the province for supporting your project, because if they don't support your project, the SHRA won't look at a grant application. You're dependent on the municipality for supporting the project, because without that support, again, the SHRA won't look at the grant application. So simply we had a question earlier to say, what role does the municipality play? And yes, the broader role of the municipality will come out in the next training, but the one role that it does play in terms of getting CCG funding is that it has to give a letter of support. And actually your town planning approvals also come from the local municipality. So your second strategic goal is really around staffing, systems, office infrastructure, and institutional arrangements. Because imagine if you didn't have an institutional arrangement with the SHRA and the province and the municipality, and you didn't see them for 18 months or 2 years, they're not going to remember that you came to this training today. You're going to have to explain for who you are, what your first project is. Whereas if you attended a PSC meeting, which is headed by the province on a monthly basis, and you attend that meeting, they'll know who you are, they know being a project. They will help you troubleshoot if you need to, if you have any blockages in delivering your project. So better have institutional arrangements as part of your second strategic goal. Your third strategic goal should really be about giving good service to your clients. It's property management services and it's tenant management services. You want to give, and what are the programs that allow you to give those two services in a good way? How are you going to deal with maintenance? How are you going to deal with letting of properties? What are you going to do with non-adherence to the lease agreement? How are you going to build communities? All of those things will come under that third strategic goal. The fourth strategic goal should really be about stakeholder relationship, building it and managing it, so that again, you identify who the key stakeholders are and how are you going to have institutionalized arrangements with those key stakeholders, which enables you to deliver the social housing projects that you need to deliver. And then if you are going to have a very stretched vision and mission, then you may want to have a fifth strategic goal that talks to research and innovation, so that it does allow you to set yourself up to become a leading organization. But that one is only if you have a really stretched vision. And then obviously your KPIs should be linked to your strategic goals. So what is the KPI for growth? What is the KPI for financial viability? What is the KPI for service delivery? Those types of things, so that we know then that your strategic goals are results-based. They are linked to a particular KPI with a particular threshold. The SHRA has benchmarks or thresholds that you must meet. So it says you must have less than 2% vacancies. It says you must have less than 3% bad debts. So there are thresholds that the SHRA sets, and you should then be in line with those thresholds and set those as your benchmarks up front. Because there's two considerations with your KPIs and your thresholds, particularly around thresholds is the SHRA sets it and you have to comply with it. And secondly, it may be that your project requires a particular threshold. So maybe if the SHRA's threshold for vacancy is 2%, but your financial modeling shows that you can only have, this project only has appetite for 1% vacancy threshold, then you've got to set it at 1%, right? Because that is what this project requires. Can we move on, John? The next chapter is around just introducing yourself and your organization. So, why did you decide to participate in social housing? What is the background of the directors that allowed them to come into the social housing space? What is an overview of demand? Like just a sentence or a paragraph that says, I'm going to be doing a project in the CBD of COJ, and this is the type of demand profile in the area. And then say, what are your achievements? Your achievements are you prepared the accreditation application, you've acquired the first piece of land. What have you done so far to get into the space of social housing? And what are the challenges that the generally faces? But also, what challenges are you facing as a new SHI? It doesn't have to be a long story, just a paragraph on each of these, a one-pager that covers an introduction to you is more than sufficient. Because remember also, you're writing your strategic business plan mainly for funders who will give you funding. So you don't want a 150-page strategic plan that nobody's going to read all those pages. Let it be succinct, let it be to the point, and let it talk to credibility. And so as we proceed through the chapters, I'm going to be giving you advice on how to develop a credible strategic business plan. Your next chapter, your third chapter of the strategic business plan is your organizational chapter. Here you are going to introduce your company. My company name is this. I'm registered with the CIPC. This is the ownership structure and control. We're an NPC, so there's no ownership. We're a public company. Our structure is there's a non-executive director, a board of directors. They have these skills and they are in control. Yes, they have delegated some stuff to the CEO and to the chairperson and to the committees. This is how it works. So you're going to be explaining your legal form. You're going to be explaining your governance arrangements, and even putting in the names of the board of directors with the skills that they hold and the type of directorship that they're holding, whether it's non-executive or executive. You're then going to introduce your management team. Now, in most cases here, with your organizational structure, when you're applying for accreditation, you don't have staff yet, but you would have planned for staff. So you would put in your planned structure here. We are building 300 units. And so our first structure, currently our board will fulfill the role of setting up the organization. They'll be giving sweat equity into this business because we don't have money yet. We don't have rental income. And so this is our arrangement. But the minute our first project of 300 units are delivered, this is the type of structure that we're going to be having. Now, guys, remember again, if you are delivering 300 units, you are getting X amount per annum in. You can only spend about 30 to 40% of your rental revenue towards staff cost. So be realistic about what positions you need and what you can afford. Do those sums as you're developing this chapter. Let your project delivery, the number of units you're going to deliver, let that inform what your organizational chapter looks like from a organizational structure position. Make sure that it's affordable. Make sure that it's the positions that you really need for that number of units that you're going to be delivering. Then give an overview of your operating systems. These all the policies that you have developed that we covered so far and will cover still tomorrow. You would list them and say they are in place and I'm going to review them every 3 years. Give an overview of your performance management system at a board level, at a staff level, at an organizational level. This is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to set KPIs and thresholds. I'm going to monitor it quarterly. The reports are going to look like this. And if there's anything that's not performing, this is how we're going to deal with it. And then lastly, the organizational chapter should talk to institutional arrangements. So yes, I'm going to attend the PSC because I'm going to find the SHA there. I'm going to find the bank there, NHFC. I'm going to find the province and the municipality there. I'm going to attend all SHA's training programs. I'm going to join the National Association of Social Housing Organizations because they're the body the union that represents SHIs and lobbies and advocates on behalf of SHIs. Those are the types of institutional arrangements I'm going to have when I'm managing stock. I'm going to join the university's research program so that I can benefit from research they're doing. I'm going to have relationships with CBOs and NGOs because they will help me deal with my antisocial behavioral stuff that I find on site with the tenants where there's drug abuse or child abuse or whatever happening. Remember, you can't be all things to everybody and you can't hold all those skills in your SHI. So you're going to be dependent on external organizations to assist you. And so those institutional arrangements need to be unpacked and they'll be informed by the stakeholder analysis that you would have done. Can we move on? Your fourth chapter is really going to talk to an analysis of the environment. So at a micro level, you're going to do a SWOT analysis. So what are your strengths? Your strengths may be that you have a well-skilled board, you have a piece of land available. It's things that you have in your back pocket already as you're applying for accreditation. What would your weaknesses be? Maybe you're not experienced in social housing. Land is expensive to buy. That may be a weakness. Those types of weaknesses that you would identify as a new SHI. What are the opportunities? The opportunity is that the SHA can provide institutional grants to help you gear yourself up. They can provide you a capital grant. There's demand for affordable rental housing. Those are all opportunities that you're wanting to exploit as a new SHI. The threats that you're facing is the threat of rent boycott, the economic downturn, which impacts the affordability of new tenants coming in to pay rent. Those are the types of things. The threat of pandemics happening is another threat. You know, what are the key threats that you're facing? Those are more at a micro level that you are doing a SWOT analysis. Then at a macro level, you're now wanting to do a risk analysis on the basis using the pestle analysis model. And so from a political point of view, how is the GNU going to work for us at a national level? At a municipal level, elections is in 2026. There's uncertainty about municipal support for the program because there may be, change in the political landscape. What are those key political aspects? What are the economic aspects, especially around affordability and the cost of finance? Those are two key things. What are the social aspects? Poorer communities face a lot of antisocial and behavioral problems like drug abuse, child abuse, all those types of alcohol abuse and so on. But also just the mobility rates of people. People move to centers of employment. So maybe turnover of your units will be high as people seek better jobs in bigger centers and so on. So those are the types of social issues that you would recognize or identify as risks. From a technological point of view, again, we can bring in all these fancy technological innovations into our projects, but the funding model doesn't allow for all of that. We all like solar panels, we all like grey water systems, we all would like to have the best systems for heating water and so on. But the reality on the ground is we can't deploy all of those things because our financial model is constrained. We can only afford to spend X amount on a unit, to build a unit, to be able to meet the funding hurdles that is required to be met. So technologically, what can we do that is cheap and effective and that we can afford? And what are the constraints in bringing in technology that we just can't afford? It's inhibitive or prohibitive. Then from a legislative point of view, on the one hand, we have a very conducive enabling environment brought by the Social Housing Act. But on the other hand, there's a big stick that comes out if we don't comply. And how do we monitor compliance, ensure compliance? And what does it cost us to be compliant? Because you would need someone to do that work for you. So there's the issue of legislation and then environmental factors. So what are the things, the greening things that can make your projects more sustainable, and how can it be brought into your business? So that's your pestle analysis. I've given you some pointers on the key things that affect you as a business, as a starting SHI. And then your stakeholder analysis. To do that, you need to identify the stakeholder. What do you need from that stakeholder? Rank and rate them. You know, are they high, medium, or low? Because you only want to look at the high ones and some of the medium ones. And what type of institutional arrangement will you have with that stakeholder? So we've spoken about the province. What do you need from the province? You need the letter of support. Otherwise, you won't be able to build your project. Right? So what is the institutional arrangement? You're going to sit in you're going to go monthly to the PSC meeting in your region. The same with the SHRA. What do you need from them? You need grant funding from them. How do you rank them? They're high, right? Because you're totally dependent on that grant funding to build your project. What type of institutional arrangement? You will attend the PSC because they're there, but you will attend all their training fora as well, and every other meeting that they call, you will attend. So that's the type of thing, and the stakeholder analysis will really tell you what your institutional arrangement should be. Can we move on, John? The next chapter is really about market demand analysis, and guys, these things are expensive, and you end up paying a lot of money, like 150,000 for a 350-page market demand analysis undertaken by a big research house. Yes, we need to do it, but yes, we need to do it on a smarter basis. And yes, it needs to be more pointed. Instead of having 350 pages of waffle, you want to see these particular things. So from a demand side, you want to see the demographic profile. What is the population size of your municipality or the area where you're going to be building your project? What is the growth in population? What is the number of households in the municipality or the area where you're going to build? And what is the growth rate? What is the educational levels? What is the income? What is the employment? What is the GVA of that municipal area? What is the economic growth? All of those indicators will tell you what your market looks like. Who are your potential users of the project that you are going to build? From a supply analysis point of view, you need to understand the housing market in that area where you're going to be building. You know, what does the ownership market look like? What percentage own a property? What is the average house price? For instance, if the average house price is R1 million in the area where you're going to build a project, and the repayment is 20,000 on R1 million, and people spend a third of their income on servicing their housing cost, already you're going to find that people must earn 60,000 to be able to buy a house. So everybody earning under 60,000 is excluded from the market. That already tells you that those people will be pushed into your market. The same with the rentals. If TPN says your average rental is 8,000 Rand a month, people will have to earn 32,000 Rand a month to be able to afford the 8,000 Rand rental, meaning that people earning under 32,000 are excluded from that market largely. That is the market that would come to you as a social housing institution. The size of the rental market is also important because you can use that as a determinant to establish what percentage of the market would rent a house from you. So it's all of those things are important to have in this study. Generally, you would draw the information from Stats SA, but you would also need financial information, which is from Quantec or Wazimap, those types of places. But those are where you have to pay for the data. So you could try to do it yourself, but you could also use someone to do it on a smart basis and not give you that 300 odd pages. That is just a lot of waffle and doesn't actually tell you or make credible assumptions around projected demand. Can we move on, John? Our next chapter is now where we start. So the previous chapters were really about analyzing the environment, SWOT, PESTLE, stakeholder analysis, market demand analysis, organizational analysis. All of that analysis is now done. We have enough information to start developing our business plan. The first part of our plan is what products and services are we going to offer? What is our pricing range? Now, the SHRA prescribes that our target market is between 1850 and 22,000. And within that range, there's a whole lot of subcategories or sub-segments of the target market. And the SHRA expects us to allocate units to all of those sub-segments of the target market. So bearing that in mind, we would have there's normally 5 sub-segments of the target market, 5 categories. And so you have to have a certain percentage of your units catering for each category. And you have to have a certain average rental for each category. So your pricing would either be what the SHRA is prescribing, or if your market demand study says it needs to be different. So say, for instance, the SHRA says people earning 1850 to 35, you must have 5% of your units in that category. But your market demand study says that there is only 3% demand in that category. Then you would motivate in this chapter to the SHRA to say, I'm only going to provide 3% in that market because my market demand study says that. So your pricing is important. It's informed by your market demand study, but it's also informed by what is prescribed by the SHRA. And then you need to talk about the projects that you're going to deliver. In what locations are you going to use the RZ as a primary locality indicator? And you're also going to start profiling. So I'm only going to do greenfield developments. I'm going to do brownfields and greenfield developments. So I'm going to buy existing buildings and refurbish it. Or I'm only going to do 3-4 story walk-ups, which is greenfield developments. My densities are going to be about 110 units per hectare. This is the types of units. I'm going to have a mix of bachelor 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. I'm going to have these finishes as a minimum type of finish in my units. And I'm going to provide these type of amenities in my projects. I'm going to have washing lines. I'm going to have refuse areas. I'm going to have play areas for the kids. I'm going to have a security fence with a guardhouse for exit and entrance. These are the types of amenities that I'm going to be having within my project. So just a brief profile of the types of projects that you're going to be developing in this 5-year horizon. And then obviously the positioning. So if you're going into the CBD of Joburg, you are going to find well-established SHIs like JHC, Madula Moho, Joshco, quite a number of well-established SHIs with portfolios, right? How are you going to position your stock and your company in opposed to those other SHIs? What's going to differentiate you from them? You may say to yourself, I don't have a differentiation strategy because the demand is so much in the CBD that I don't have to worry. But for instance, JHC, when you drive in the Joburg CBD and you see all their units are painted with one color. I think it's red or something. I can't remember what the color is. But you can see a JHC building when you are driving through the CBD because they've decided to distinguish themselves by the color they use on their paint, right? So from a product point of view, those are the things you need to have in that part of your strategic plan. From a services point of view, again, a summary or an overview of what client services you're going to offer in terms of communication, consultation, development, and participation. From a property management point of view, how are you going to deal with rent management, maintenance management, facilities management, and utilities management? Guys, this only needs to be a page or 2, right? You're giving an overview of your products and an overview of your services. You are going to have a service delivery plan later, which is going to unpack how you provide services to that first project that you're developing. Can we move on, John? From a risk management point of view, we've discussed the risk matrix is what you should cut into this, and it should have a mitigation strategy and which chapter of your strategic plan is addressing the key risk. So you can say the risk of rent boycotts is covered in the service delivery plan. That's where you will find how we're going to manage the threat of rent boycotts. John, can you move on? From a project and this is the heartbeat of your strat plan, is your project development plan. So you must say what land you've got, what stage of readiness it is in terms of its delivery schedule. Have you got town planning approvals? Is it properly zoned? You need to subdivide, you need to consolidate the land. You need to show a delivery or construction program, and you need to say what the costs are and link to those costs, who's going to fund the cost. So a portion is going to come from the CCG grant, the other portion is going to come from debt funding. You must say what type of developments you're going to do over the 5 years, how are you going to procure, making sure that you have a proper procurement approach, that you're not just going to hire your brother and your cousin and your whoever, that there is a proper open process, that BEE is taken into consideration. How are you going to see that there's quality control over the packaging of the project and the construction of the project? You'll have a clerk of works maybe, or a project manager, and your professional team, the architect will be the principal agent. They will manage the packaging of the project, those types of things. And then how are you going to plan for long-term maintenance planning? And there's specific requirements around that. Can we move on, John? And this chapter really informs the rest of your strategic plan. Your next chapter is your service delivery plan. Now, guys, do not take your policy and cut your policies for all these things into here, because this is not what the SHRA is looking for. The SHRA is looking for a plan. You said I'm developing 300 units over the next 5 years, only one project. Then you must be able to say, I'm going to do my maintenance in this way, I'm going to do my facilities in that way. In facilities, I'm going to do gardening, I'm going to do cleaning, I'm going to do security. Under utilities, I've got prepaid electricity, prepaid water, so I don't need to do anything under that. Under rent administration, this is how I'm going to set my rents, this is when I'm going to do. So what is the deliverable, what is the action, and who's responsible for it, is what we're looking for across all of these areas. Highlighting property management as one area with rent, utilities, vacancy, maintenance, and facilities management as the subcomponents, and tenant management or client services management that is related to marketing of the units, letting of the units, letting management of the units, and all of those good things. So this is what it is, a plan. It is not a policy. It needs to show how you're going to do it, who's going to do it, when are you going to do it. Let's move on, John, to the next chapter. It's your, oh, okay, so I'm missing one. I'm missing 2 slides there. The one is you need to have an internal management plan that talks to how your ICT and your information is going to be managed, how you're going to deal with document management, how you're going to deal with strategic planning, and how are you going to deal with communication and internal controls. So that is your internal management chapter. I've missed that one. I will add it in before we send it out. And then your next chapter is your financial plan. So what the SHRA wants to see is a pro forma balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow statement. Right? John, just remind me, I must add in those 2 slides. I missed them out. Then after that is the end of your strategic business plan. Your next plan is your annual business plan. And that annual business plan should just be a summary of your strategic plan. It should do if it's not in the first year when you wrote the 5-year plan, you would have to do a strategic review of your performance of the previous year, and then just unpack your annual strategic goals and programs into an operational plan and have an annual budget attached to it. But remember, when you're doing it the first time around, you would use the same summary of the external environment review that you would have done in the 5-year strategy. Your 5 strategic goals will still be relevant, and you would unpack what you would do over the 4 quarters for 2025. If you're writing your plan now in 2024, look at the next 12-month cycle and write what you are going to achieve in that first 4 quarters. So it will be the same strategic goals, but the strategic programs would be only portion of each one, because it's only what you can achieve in that next year. And the budget accordingly would be the same. Can we move on, John? So from an organizational development point of view, you've got to use an incremental stepped approach, right? Because you don't have money in the first years. It will take you at least 2 years to start building your a year to start building, and construction takes another 24 months if you are building a greenfields project of 500 units and more. So what you do whilst you're getting yourself up before you have rental income, you got to make your board a bit more operational to volunteer their time to do this whole accreditation thing and do the project packaging thing and apply for an institutional grant to start covering at least a CEO salary or a finance person's salary so that they can do the work of packaging the project. And it must be linked to your income. Like I said earlier, if you're building 300 units, you can only afford to spend about 30 to 40% of your revenue as staff cost. And so that forms who you can appoint. And secondly, you only need certain staff to manage a project of 300 units. We'll get to the results of that case study we did because that will give you the answer. Can we move on, John? So essentially, when you're starting out, you've got your board of directors, they're providing strategic direction, they're developing the organization, and they're monitoring the performance. They may appoint an acting CEO or may appoint a CEO because they can afford one. That person will start to get accreditation going, gear up the organization, package the first project, and putting some type of operations management system in place, like your operating policies and procedures. So this is what your first generation looks like. Now, as you're sitting in the room and you're deciding to go for accreditation, this is how you can organize yourself while you have no income, right? Then you have your first project of 500 units that come. John, can you move to the next slide? You now have 500 units that are going to be delivered. And so now you've got the rental income to gear up your organization. But before the rental income comes in, there's the finance manager and the letting officer will have to come in at least 6 months before the project is handed over by the contractor, because letting has to start and the finance manager has got to manage this disbursement of the grant, disbursement of the debt funding, and seeing that that in a good way, because it's very stringent how the SHRA releases funds, the capital grant, and also the debt funder has stringent requirements. So better have a finance person in place that will be able to do that. The same goes with letting. That letting officer will have to put out the marketing material, receive applications, screen the applications, sign up lease agreements, all before the project is handed over, so that on that day when the contractor hands over the project, the letting office is ready to put people into units. The units are not going to stand empty, because you know what would happen to an empty project. People will come and invade it. You will have to spend money on security, money which you don't have. So rather have tenants ready to move in on the day that that project is handed over. But once the rental comes in, you would have a CEO. The CEO would have an administrator, not a PA yet, because they can't afford a PA exclusively working for the CEO. So that administrator would serve as the CEO and the management team. You would have a finance manager with a bookkeeper, and the bookkeeper is normally a rental administrator as well. There's a credit controller for those people that are not paying rent, and there's a receptionist that is manning the front office. Client services manager will come into play with a letting officer and tenant liaison officer, and normally the letting officer, once they finish letting that first 500 units and the turnover is very slow in the first year or two, they also fill in the role of tenant liaison officer to keep them busy. You would have a property manager that could potentially have 2 work streams. The property manager could be responsible for property development and may have a clerk of works under that person. And they would also be responsible for managing, doing the maintenance, and the facilities management would be supported by a housing supervisor who may have gardening and cleaning under their thing. What would be outsourced would be HR services, because it's a small staff complement. You would outsource IT services because, first of all, you can't afford to keep it in-house, and would service the office computers and infrastructure. And you would outsource security, because remember, security comes with its own legislation, right? And so you rather outsource this to a company that understands that legislation and will be compliant. and that you don't hold the staff in-house, because then you need another manager in place to manage the legal requirements of security. So this is what your second organogram would look like. And then you start going to 1,000, 1,500 units. This organogram would not change. You would only add more credit controllers, more letting officers, more tenant liaison officers, more housing supervisors in place, right? And at some stage, when you like in 3,000, 4,000 units, your finance manager could become a CFO or corporate services manager, and then have a finance manager under them. You could introduce a property development manager, because you have a whole pipeline of projects being delivered every year in construction, and you would separate it from the property manager's position. Under client services, you would bring a community development officer. Generally, it would be someone with a social work degree that will come and run these empowerment projects and programs that you have. Move on, John. Okay, and then institutional arrangements, can you move on? It would really be around having institutional arrangements with the SHRA, with the province, with the municipalities, with the tenants, with other SHIs through NASHO, with universities for research, and community-based organizations to help you with your antisocial behavioral stuff on site. And so for a starting SHI, because NGOs and CBOs and you don't have stock under management yet, those are not important now. The main fora is PSC and the SHRA. So Mpho, I want to stop now, and I want us to do the feedback on the case study. And then I want us to move into, I actually want to do financial management quite quickly after that. And then I want us to move into a reflection mode because we covered a lot of ground now, and I'm sure there'll be many questions. Mpho, are you okay?
Yes, I'm here, Khafi. I thought I'm not on mute. I'm only picking it up now that I'm on mute.
Okay, so can we get our two people to present their results, and then can John put up the answer sheet after they've presented?
Yes.
And we can have a discussion.
Yes. So we can maybe start with Lucky. Lucky agreed to help us, and also Exodus also agreed to help us. So we have those two. So I think we can start with Lucky first.
Keep it to 5 minutes each, not longer than that. Lucky, are you ready to start? Mpho, is Lucky still in the room?
Yes, he's still in the room. Can we maybe move to Exodus while Lucky is getting ready?
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, Khafi, Lucky can hear me. The problem is with the mic.
Okay, so then the only other alternative is if you give me a sort of a summary of Lucky and the other person's result. Oh, there's Lucky now.
No, you know what? I actually just realized when there was that disturbing noise in the background as you're presenting, I disallowed the mics. So maybe that's where the problem is. Apologies for that. Let's try again, Lucky. Please unmute your mic. I have enabled your
Still
mics.
nothing, Lucky?
Okay. It does seem like it's still the same old issue then.
Oh, there he is.
you are.
Thank you.
Hi, Lucky. Yes, loud and clear.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear us?
We can hear you, Lucky.
Hear you. Okay, thank you. Can I continue, please?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. So I'm going to answer those questions that was raised on the case study. Okay, can I answer the question, or should I start with the question first? Hello?
I think you can start with the first one, and maybe you can also just try to make it sound. Don't make it a Q&A. Maybe like just give us your thoughts, and your views on it.
Okay, my thoughts regarding.
Happy, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes,
can
we
hear
can hear
you.
you.
Hello.
We can hear you,
Yeah.
but we lost Lucky.
Okay, like he's coming back. I'm admitting him now.
Otherwise, Paul, if this, I think we're going to lose too much time on this.
Yeah,
If it
I'm
doesn't
also
work out
thinking
in the
so.
next minute, then I'm suggesting that you give us an overview of what you're seeing the responses are, and then I can go to the model answers with the group. And we can potentially have a discussion with them around the answers.
Okay, so you know what I can do? I'm trying to get the document that I just sent you to John and yourselves. Maybe we can use that to just get an overview of the responses. I'm gonna open it on my side. It's coming. John, do you mind giving me access to share just for now, and then you will fly your presentation again?
Okay, I've stopped sharing, so you can bring it up on your side.
Happy, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see. I can see it.
Yeah, I
Paul?
think just enlarge it a bit because the text is rather too faint. So maybe if you enlarge they're much
Okay, it's
better.
fine now. Okay, so you know what I did here? Instead of us having to go through each question and its answers, I just consolidated them as one. So where you find out that the other responded the same answer as the other one, I just made them one. So I will just take you through the question and the responses. I think I'm hearing myself talking again on the background. Is there someone with two devices open?
Yeah, well, let me try and disable the mics again. I hope it doesn't affect yours. So I suspect it might probably be coming from someone else's from in the room. Try again.
I think I'm fine now.
Cool.
Fine. So Khafi, the first question was, what is the appropriate governance arrangement and the structure? The responses are as follow, and I hope everyone can also be helping me to read on the background, so that if I'm lacking, at least you are also getting to get the view. The other respondents responded to say governance structure should include a board of directors with diverse expertise in social housing, finance, property management, and governance. It may also involve tenant representation to ensure alignment with tenant needs. The second response says the board should ensure transparency, accountability, and compliance with national regulations, such as the Social Housing Regulatory Authority. I think here they want to say with the acts that we have and the policies that we have. And then the third one says committees focuses on compliance, risk management, financial oversight. Yes, and financial oversight are essential for maintaining good governance practices. The fourth one, the leadership should include a CEO, CFO, and other senior executives, ensuring clear accountability while advisory panels or tenant advisory groups help in decision making. Do we maybe want to discuss this first question?
Yes.
Or do you want to read all of them and then discuss all at once?
No, can we just discuss the governance arrangement now? I think it's a good moment. We're pausing on governance, and I would like to make some input. So
Okay.
the first item that I'd like to talk to is tenant representation to ensure that alignment of tenants' needs are met. Let me paint a picture for you. If you had tenants on the board and you were taking a decision around rent increases, What do you think the tenant representative's view would be? Because what you need to do is you need to increase rentals to cover the cost that you're facing. And it may be that the rate of inflation is 9% this year, but you're actually going to be 10%. Why? Because your electricity went up by 10% and not 9%. What do you think the tenant's view is going to be? Are they conflicted or are they not conflicted? Can we have anyone in the room that would like to engage on this one? Very quickly in 2 minutes. Paul, will you help me with the person's hand that is up? John, I think we're going to have a problem now if they're on mute.
Yeah, no, I've opened the mics, so
Okay.
anyone can unmute themselves to engage that.
So
We've got Tolagele.
Tolakele, please go ahead.
Okay, yes, my view is that they will be conflicted since the opinion will favor the tenant. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Absolutely. So you're spot on. It's not advisable to have tenants on the board because they conflicted on in many instances. This is just one example. But what we're saying is tenants' needs and tenants' wants can still be heard through different channels. If you have a good relationship with your tenants and you are doing community development and tenants are participating, as an SHR, you will have a good understanding of what their needs and wants are. And you will reflect those needs and wants in your board meetings. So it doesn't mean that they have to be in a board meeting to assist you to make a decision. You would have done tenant satisfaction surveys. You would have had tenants' records of the way in which they behave. All of those reports you take to the board. And those reports should influence the decisions of the board. So tenant participation in the board is an absolute no-no. They are conflicted. They're not going to take decisions in the best interest of the company. And there's other ways of getting to engage them, consult with them, have their needs and wants heard, and how to incorporate that into your decision making. So that's the first comment that I want to make. Now I'm seeing something else on my screen. Can this thing go away? There's a screen. I can't see your Word document, Paul, because there's another screen in front of it. And I can't move it.
You can't see now. Oh, that's the problem. Remember, now I'm sharing on the side and I'm also keeping tab on the
so now I can see it. So the absolute second and third point are absolutes. And so the third point, which says there should be one committee that talks to compliance, risk, and financial oversight, I think that's an absolute must. You should start with it. Whether you can afford a CEO and a CFO in the early stages while you're seeking accreditation is a question. It's not only about affordability, is whether you need a CFO. If you're only developing 300 to 500 units as a first project, you certainly can't afford a CFO and you do not need a CFO, right? So that's the one thing. And then the other thing is that you can't afford many committees. And you don't need many committees because if they only have 5 board members, it is even going to be difficult for you to populate the finance and audit and risk committee, that one committee, because you're going to need at least 3 people sitting on that committee and you're only 5 board members. You must also remember that, do you need the committees? One. And secondly, how are you going to populate it because you have a small board and you can't afford a bigger board in any case. So those are the considerations of your governance arrangement. And also a consideration that is not here is, how do the board, as much as they're non-executive and supposed to be in an oversight role, but in the early years, while you don't have money and you don't have rental revenue, how can they play a more active role in the board? But with the clear view that when the management team comes in place, they move back to an oversight role and they don't get involved in the operations of the business, because that's the other danger of an operational board. Can you move on to the next question? Unless there's anyone that wants to talk more about the governance arrangement, we can move on to the next question. I don't see any hands up. Mpo, take us through the next one.
Okay. The next one was, what is the appropriate organizational structure? And then we have two responses. The first response says the organization should be led by a CEO who reports to the board of directors with department focused on key functions such as property management, financial management, tenant management, compliance and legal matters, human resources and marketing, operations, maintenance, and project management, same as the ones that are above. And then the second response says, some suggest structuring the entity as a NPC, SHI, PTY Ltd, depending on the strategic objective and regulatory requirements.
Okay, so let us deal with 2 and 3 together, because the next one then tells us when appointment should be made. What is the view of the responses for question 3?
Do you want us to go to 3, Khafi?
Yes, please.
Okay. 3 says, how and when will you gear up the organization? The first response, getting up the organization typically follows accreditation and involves a phased approach. Initial steps include strategic planning, conducting feasibility studies, and setting up operational and capital budgets. The recruitment of key staff, such as a senior management, tenant management teams, should occur before operational handover, with ongoing training and performance evaluation systems to ensure compliance with evolving industry regulations. The timeline for gearing up ranges from after accreditation or within the first 12 months of stability, depending on the organization's capacity to handle the scale of operations and regulatory compliance.
Thanks, Mpo.
So we also have people that indicated direct with the number of days, and yes, it was not a lot of talking of weights. So they were suggesting that it begins as early as 90 days post registration and accreditation, while others were saying that it can take within 1 to 3 years after building a portfolio of units.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to put up the answer sheet, Mpo?
I can leave that for John, because remember, after the answer sheet now, he must also have the access to the presentation.
Okay.
So this was just a temp. Thank you.
Okay. John, it's the case study 1 answer sheet, eh?
The Excel spreadsheet.
The Excel spreadsheet, yeah.
Yes.
So what, you sent it on email, Mpo?
Yes, I sent it via email at 10:40. I'm aware that I've been sending you a lot of emails. 10:40.
I've got the email at 11. Oh, wait, which one is this? Oh, okay. We first get to it. Okay, it's still opening.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Almost there. Tell me if it's showing. Is this one?
Yes, John, that's the correct one that you just said now.
Okay.
John, it's disappeared from the screen.
Has it?
Yes.
Try that again.
Yeah, so if you can move up a bit up the page, if you look at question 1, we would have a board of directors and we would have an audit and risk, so finance audit and risk committee. That is what you can afford and that is what you need at the starting stage. At the stage when your project is going to almost be delivered, you would have this organogram, a CEO with an administrator, finance, client services and property with those staff under them. I've even gone to the extent of saying, so we're having 300 units delivered. There's an average rental of 3,377, gives us an annual income of 12 million rand. If we spend 30% of our staff cost as a percentage of that 12 million, we should be spending 3.6 million on staff costs. So we can afford the CEO at 600, administrator at 180, finance at 400, all the managers at 400,000, all the administration staff at 180,000 per annum, and then your gardening and your cleaning staff at 66,000 per annum. That gives you an all-in cost per annum of 2.8 million. You are under the benchmark of 3.6 million, and it's actually costing you 786 Rand per unit per month. Now, already you can see that if you take the 3,377, you take the 786 off, you still got to pay your bond cost from the balance, and you've got to pay these outsourced services. Remember, we said HR, IT, and securities outsourced. And that you still got to also pay your direct property costs like your rates and taxes, your utility bills, your insurance, your health and safety certification, your maintenance cost has still got to come out of the balance after you deduct the 786. So what was the answer to question 3? John, can you move down the page a bit? Yeah, so question 3 was really saying during the establishment phase, you should have an acting CEO, potentially someone from the board for a certain amount of time until you can get an institutional grant from John's unit to pay for a CEO and a finance manager. And then 5 to 3 months before the project is handed over, bring in your letting officer also to be paid from that institutional grant. And then on handover of the project, the balance of that organogram then is populated because you've got sufficient rental income to cover that entire organogram, as you can see from the estimated figures that I've put before you. John, I do think that this can also be distributed with the pack. So if we move on, perhaps let's not take questions now to this. Let's take questions at 12:30, where we do the reflection and the evaluation. You can also then make inputs towards this case study and any other questions you have. I just want to move on to financial management arrangements that you need to have in place. And then we'll stop for that reflection and stop for the day as well, because it has been a lot of information as well. So if we go back to the presentation, we're done with good governance, right? It was all those governance policies. It was the strategic plan. It was setting up the organization. Those are all the things that need to be done to ensure that good governance is in place. We're now moving on to the 4th key performance area, which is financial viability. So the only thing that the SHRA looks at during the accreditation application is for the financial management policies and procedures. But there's a whole host of things that need to be included in that policy. And from a voluminous point of view, this is probably the most voluminous policy that you would have in place. Can we move to the next slide, John? So the opening of the policy must talk to duties and responsibilities, not only of the staff responsible for financial management, but also in terms of what responsibilities the board have, the chairperson of the board has, the finance or CFO has, the staff, the bookkeeper, the rental control officers, the credit controllers. What responsibilities and duties do they have is actually your opening chapter. The next one is about key office and staff procedures, really as it relates to financial management, right? Then a whole policy and procedures on revenue management, like the revenue cycle, rental revenue, rent deposits, bad debt procedures, all of the procedures that is linked to revenue, because your core revenue is rental. So this center really, this section of the policy centers around two key revenue streams. One, how do you deal with revenue for the capital funding that you receive in to build and develop? And how do you deal with ongoing revenue that you receive from rental, right? It's essentially those two aspects that must be covered in the policy and the procedures. From the second, well, the third big item is, or the fourth big item is expenditure management. Can you move to the next slide, John? So how are you going to deal with expenditure management from a policy point of view and from a procedure point of view? Procurement is a component of expenditure management. Now, general procurement in the course of events while you're managing properties is one thing, but procurement around asset acquisition is entirely different thing. Both needs to be covered. What are your credit control procedures in terms of collection? What are your payroll payment methods and so on? How are you going to manage your assets? How are you going to deal with depreciation and all of those things around asset management? How are you going to deal with maintenance reservations that is required in terms of your asset management strategy? From an acquisition and disposal point of view, you need to have a policy statement and procedures around that. And on fixed asset acquisition and disposal, remember you have that provision that says you can't dispose of any of social housing stock that is funded by the SHRA unless you offer the net asset back to the SHRA. That type of thing must be reflected. The financial arrangements for that transactions need to be reflected in this policy. How are you going to deal with investments? How are you going to deal with bank and cash cycles, including treasury management? There will be an occasion where you're getting in grant money, and that grant money comes in ahead of the contractor being paid. How are you going to protect that investment? How are you going to manage the treasury aspect of it? Petty cash management procedures, how are you going to budget? And it's more than budgeting, guys. It's also about financial modeling and financial planning. So your financial plan in your strategic business plan needs to at least have a 5-year horizon. But the SHRA requires you to do a 20-year financial model when you are applying for funding, capital funding, or capital grant funding for each project. So it's more than just budgeting, and it also includes financial planning. Your accounting processes and your systems administration. Are we talking about your financial management systems or your business information management systems linked to financial management? So all of these have to be contained in that financial management policy. John, I think I'm done. Let me check the next slide. Oh, Mpo, this is the video that we would want you to play now, and then we're going to do another 15-minute reflection on today.
Okay, Rafi. Let me do this. Hi, Rafi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you,
Okay,
Mpo.
I think that was the end.
Okay. So, Mpo and John, do you guys want to facilitate a discussion? I will come in as needed. We would like to get some comments or feedbacks or questions in regard to the governance presentation that was done, and on financial management and organizational development as well. Are there any questions, Tabiso? You can go. Mpho, you will facilitate this section.
Okay, yeah, Khafi, I can do that. And then Khafi, I heard you earlier on saying something about the evaluation as well. Can we just pack the evaluation to tomorrow, and then we do it tomorrow as the last day of the session? So it will comprise of. Okay, no, that's fine.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean that evaluation. I just meant evaluation of today. Well, not necessarily evaluation, but more of a reflection of today.
Okay, thank you, Khafi. Tabiso?
John, have you allowed people to?
Yeah, I think you can unmute yourself, ladies and gents, as you come forth with your comment or question. Tabiso, please unmute yourself. And I see Tolakele is next. So if you have any question or comment you want to deposit, please let's just use this time to deal with those. Tabiso, can you unmute yourself and put across your question or comment, please?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Ntate John Man. Mine was on the upcoming trainings, particularly for introduction to social housing and those ones of the project packaging and so forth. Mine is on registration. Are we supposed to re-register for those ones, or those who are participating in this one are already accepted on that one, or we must re-register on it? Thank you.
Sure, yeah. So we have loaded those topics on the schedule, but because we're still finalizing few internal processes, we did not assign specific dates. So you might probably have, and I'm not sure, my colleague from marketing and communications here can best speak to this. You might find that when you went on to register for this topic, you also enlisted for the other topics like introduction and project packaging, but without dates attached to it. I'm not sure how it worked because I never used that system to register myself for this. If that was not the case, if you did not select introduction to social housing or any other topics, I would suggest that you go back into the system and reload. It's really just to pick on those topics that you have not selected. And I think it's about a 2-minute thing, really, more than anything. So yeah, I think so that we don't miss you. I can also take an assumption, but it's not the safest, that everyone who is here, is interested in joining the introduction to social housing. I could be missing a mark there. I mean, I would gladly do so. It's not an issue. But best case scenario is just to go back onto the schedule and click on those topics that you have not clicked on or selected, because initially, as indicated, we couldn't assign the dates to those because we still had processes that are still outstanding. I hope that helps. Was it Tabiso? Now there are a couple of hands,
yes,
but I
of
see
course.
they've
Thank
gone.
you. Thank you very much.
Great. There are a couple of hands that have gone down, but I see Mabandla, you still have your hand up. Please unmute yourself.
Hi,
Okay,
this is
excuse me, Dr. John, excuse me, Amanda. I wanted to say that John, you can keep looking on the screen, and then I will track the questions that are coming in through the chat, because I see other people are asking the questions in the chat instead.
Okay, Mabandla and then Tolakele.
yes, thank you very much. I have two questions. unfortunately, but I'll try and be as quick as possible. Just on the registration, or the MOI, understanding the MOI, assuming you are an ODA. I just wanted to just clarify. Does this mean that if my MOI has followed what you recommended, Gafi, to the letter in terms of this entity in the business of social housing and everything, that you mentioned in your slides, does that mean it cannot be a generic property owning and letting company? Which means, can it own social housing assets as well as other generic commercial property assets, or does it have to be isolated and only do specifically social housing?
John, do you want us to respond to each question as they come up? Yeah? Okay. Okay. So Tolakile, it's actually a double barrel question and an important one that I may not have covered sufficiently. So if you want to participate as an ODA, you need not have any of those provisions in your MOI. And so you can use a standard one, the one that the CIPC provides, but there's also a very good template that the SHRA has provided for ODAs. So, John, we must just include that in the pack. I'm happy to send the template of the SHRA to the ODA. But I also want to answer the question in a more nuanced way. So if it is that you are an existing company and you want to apply for capital grant funding for a social housing project, in all likelihood, the SHRA is going to require you to set up an SPV to do the social housing project, for the sole reason that they want to ring fence the social housing stock in a separate entity. Because if your other business goes belly up, it means that they could potentially lose their investment into the social housing component. So then if you are setting up an SPV as an ODA, you may not need those not-for-profit provisions, but in your MOI, you would have to have your main object as being the provider of social housing, right? So the main object provision would apply in your MOI, but not the not-for-profit provisions. And I think I need to answer your question in that way, because if you're an existing building that has got a broader service offering, the SHRA would, when they do fund you, they would want you to ring fence the social housing business, because they want to be able to extract it if they have to, but they also don't want it to be lost if your other business goes belly up.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Please remind us to send you the MOI, because I think it will be useful for you if you are going to set up the SPV.
Thank you so much. I shall definitely do that. And now, just for my last question, I know that as part of the requirements within the documentation that is submitted as part of the application for accreditation, you require a capacitation plan. This is especially true for an entity that really has never operated within the realm of social housing. I just wanted to know, how specific must be the capacitation plan? Must it just define generic milestones or specific milestones that look, as an example, we are going to onboard entity X, and they have experience in doing this, and then during that time, a certain number of our staff members are going to be shadowing these people, and then within 6 months, they will gradually do a handover, or something to that effect. Is that what would be required?
Exactly that, Tolakile, you've got it spot on. That's exactly what you would put in that capacitation plan. You wouldn't be showing that you got a new organogram and you're going to be recruiting new staff. What you're merely going to be showing is that you have an SLA with another company who has the experience. They're going to be walking the walk with you for 6 months. At the same time, you would be recruiting, or you would be using your existing staff, your property management staff, who will then be upskilled by this company and would then move on to manage the stock. It's exactly the way you described it.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for answering my questions. And by the way, Tholakele is coming after me. My name is Mabandla.
Mabandla, sorry.
No
Sorry.
problem. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for the session. I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, Tholakele and Mabuse.
Thank you, colleagues. Mine is to just appreciate the training. I feel so empowered at this moment as a project manager. But then I just want to find out if there are possibilities that you might share the recording. Why? Because I think it's critical that we always go back and recap on today's training so that we do not lose momentum. So I think if you could just share this recording, it will really impact positively to us when it comes to executing the social housing processes. Thank you, colleagues.
Certainly, that's the plan. In fact, I've just been noting on the list here a number of handouts or part of the handout pack that we will then distribute post tomorrow's session. The recordings will be part of that as well, so that you can replay some of these things. In fact, I think if I'm correct, Khafi, tomorrow when Zanele comes in, we might even add to this list a whole range of templates, some policy templates, so that those who are interested to engage this process do not necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, because there are a whole lot of other templates on policies that have been written up. It's just to now work on those and customize it to your own institution. Mabuse, you are next, and then we will, after you, take Tebe. Please unmute yourself. Mabuse, can you hear us? Can you just unmute yourself and deposit your question or comment, please? No? All right. Maybe you may want to put on the chat line and Paul will bring it forward. Let's take Tebe, and then Paul, if you can just be ready with those comments or questions that have been put on the chat line after Tebe. Tebe, please unmute yourself and let's hear your question or comment, please. Tebe? Hi, Bo. What's going on? Did we lose Tebe now? Okay. I guess
Sorry, John.
there are some. Hi, who's that?
I think colleagues are just struggling to unmute themselves on their side. Maybe just disable quickly.
Yeah, I have disabled the mics. I've enabled the mics. I'm not sure what could be the problem, because other participants were able to get through. Well, with the time left, because I see we're just 9 minutes away from 9 o'clock.
John, can we just, sorry, John, can we, and I see Mabuse said he did have a question around the DC cost on a project. Perhaps I can just respond to it. He's put it into the chat.
No,
he can't unmute.
Okay.
So he was saying that does funding allow for DC cost? The project packaging training will really, respond to that question. The funding does allow for it, but in most cases, we always urge municipalities to either waiver the DC cost totally or to have a special dispensation on like a 50% reduction in the DC cost. So it depends on what the municipality allows where you're going to be developing, but the DC cost must be provided for in the overall cost of your project. So you will see that when you plan your project, there's a CAPEX sheet that requires all the BOQ items and then other costs like your professional fees, your other fees and tariffs that you need to pay. You would have to make provision for all of that. But the first thing is ask the municipality if they have a special dispensation for developers in particular or for social housing institutions. I know for a fact the city of Cape Town they waiver the DC cost totally. Stellenbosch is in the process of also waivering it. They've taken a policy. So many municipalities are following that train for social housing. They're waivering the cost, but some of them are not in the position to waiver the entire cost. And so they have a shared contribution model as well. So you must provide for it. But the second thing is you must also ask your municipality if there is a special dispensation on the cost. Thanks, John.
Right, I guess that deals with all the hands that we hand up. I'm not sure, maybe just in this last few minutes left, Mpho, if there are any comments or questions that were on the chat besides that which Kgafi has dealt with. Is there anything else that we need to take note of and respond to?
So Tebe has also can't unmute and is asking when can you apply for accreditation? Zanelli will cover it tomorrow, but just to answer your question now, it is open all year round. It is open between January and November of each year. You can apply at any time. It used to be a quarterly arrangement on specific dates before, but that has been relaxed now.
Okay. And then Kgafi, another question is Mabuse and Andis are basically asking the same question here. They're asking if you register an NPC, can one use or his own private company for the building?
Okay, so I'm not quite understanding the question.
Maybe Mabuse can unmute himself and just clarify, because I see he's got his hand up or her hand up.
Okay. Yeah. No, I see I made a mistake. It's not Mabuse. It's Andy, Swa, and Lindy. So, Kgafi, what they're saying is that if I'm an SHI,
yes,
I'm Madula Moho, can I be my own developer? Can I develop my own projects?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
so
you can.
That's what they're asking.
Yeah, remember in the earlier slide, we said you can be a developer, the owner, and the manager of properties. In most cases, the SHI is the developer as well. They may outsource aspects of the development to a professional team and to a contractor, but they act as the developer. But you can also outsource the developer role. What you cannot outsource as an SHI is the property management role. An ODA can outsource it, and SHI can't outsource it.
Okay, thank you, Kgafi. And then another question is from Mabuse, but I think this will also be covered in tomorrow's session. It is about the turnaround time for accreditation to get approved, assuming that the application ticks all the boxes.
Yeah, remember we also spoke about the 90-day term. It's regulated in the social housing regulations. The SHRI's got to turn over an application in 90 days. But you're quite right, it's 90 days from the time you submitted a full application.
Okay, thank you, Kgafi. And then Tabiso is asking, and I think maybe we can direct this to John, does the registration for accreditation have a time frame, or is it open throughout the year as and when you apply?
But I think Kgafi's addressed that earlier. So initially, we used to work in quarter on cycles, right? It will open at a certain time and close at that point, and then you await for the internal process to happen, and then at day 90 you get your outcome. So what is happening now, as Travis just indicated, that period of opening and closing has been relaxed, so anybody can apply at any time. It's just that according to the regulations, we are required to have, in terms of turnaround, have an outcome communicated to you in 90 days. Now, every quarter, because we work in quarters, council considers applications and approves applications for SHI accreditations. So from April to June, around about June, July, the first council sitting happens, and that's when they would adjudicate anything that would have come in from April up till then. And then from July until September, they sit in October. Their meetings are usually in October to adjudicate and decide on those that have come in that period, and it flows that way.
Okay, thank you very much, John. And then I have nothing else on my side. Thank you.
Julio, I think it's been rather insightful day one. I know at some point one would have felt, an overload, information overload, but I'm proved wrong by the level of engagement, interaction, and the questions and comments that have been received in the latter part of the session. So thank you so much. I think it's been a good day one run, and I hope it has really helped in inching a level of understanding in terms of this particular important process of the SHRA. Tomorrow we regroup again in this room, bright and early at 9 o'clock, if we can start promptly. We have a jam-packed program as we do the last run of the 2 days, and hopefully all 61 of you and plus will be here again tomorrow to finish off this race. On that note, thank you so much, and thank you again for your time, and we'll see you bright and early tomorrow. Right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.